Chapter 61. Sectum Sempra. Without uttering a spell or waving a wand, Snape simply relied on the wizard's will to cast this spell of his own invention. There is no sound, no light, just by locking the target, it can leave wounds on the target that cannot be healed except for counter curses. Kumbar's hands and feet suddenly began to tremble uncontrollably, and then he fell to the ground with a thud. His tendons were severed by the spell, and he was in so much pain that he wanted to yell, but he found that no matter how loud he yelled, he couldn't make a single sound. At this time, an old man with a sinking face also appeared at the top of the stairs. It was him who had just secretly used legilimency to suppress Snape's urge to use Avatar Na, and cast a spell on Kumbar to glue the vampire's lips together. All students, return to your common room immediately. Professor Sprout, please send all the injured little wizards to Madame Pomfrey. While he was speaking, the hall, foyer, and banquet hall of the castle all began to transform. It was Professor McGonagall who couldn't help but take action. And today, this group of little wizards had a blessing in disguise, learning a secret of the castle. It turns out that Hogwarts has more than just stairs that move. The walls began to extend, the floor began to rise, the gate outside the foyer hit the ground, and the door outside the castle closed tightly with a bang. Moreover, this transformation is not straight. The extending walls are winding and twisting, completely separating all the little wizards and the three dangerous vampires on both sides of the wall. Except for Sprout, who teaches herbology, who needs to cooperate with the school nurse Madame Pomfrey to treat the injured little wizards, the other professors and Dumbledore are all divided by the wall on the side with the vampires. Thank you, Minerva. Dumbledore nodded slightly to the deputy headmaster. This time he rarely smiled when he spoke, and one of his hands tightly grasped Snape's arm. How dare they do this? Professor McGonagall tried to calm down her breathing that was thickened by anger, and her face turned red. Harry, George, Ron, Hermione. She saw 4 little wizards falling to the ground with her own eyes, and they were all Gryffindors. At this time, this witch, who was always known for not favoring her own academy, had already revealed her hidden cub-protecting attribute. Therefore, after ensuring that the little wizards were separated into safe areas, Professor McGonagall suddenly raised the wand in her hand. The 2 symmetrical ceramic vases placed at the entrance of the foyer instantly turned into 2 male lions with fluttering manes, and they pounced on the vampire subordinates who sneaked into Hogwarts with Kumbar. Kill you to death. An angry master of transfiguration can easily make you see things you least want to face. Facing the lion transformed by Professor McGonagall, these 2 guys did not dare to use their animagus. After all, although the second African brother and the flat-headed brother can challenge the African first brother in the market legend, brother, but this is actually just the imagination of some people, they decisively used magic and wanted to use magic spells to duel the 2 male lions. Isn't this a coincidence? Among the professors at Hogwarts, there happened to be a former professional player in the Curses duel, who had also won the championship several times. Relatio. Professor Flitwick only uttered a spell. However, with the special skills that the professor had figured out, he summoned 2 powerful red lights at once, hitting the faces of the 2 vampires with a crackling sound. Although the details of these guys are not yet known, as a former professional duel champion, Professor Flitwick only used their movement habits, not relying much on wands, and the images transformed by animagus, African animals, you can see their path. Although the students taught by Wagadu Magic Academy are good at self-transformation and casting spells without a wand, they also have a small flaw. Although it seems that you can cast spells without using a wand, Wagadu School of Witchcraft and Wizardry actually uses a trick when teaching. Their students do not use the orthodox wandless casting technique, but by letting some muscles in the body rhythm instead of the overt movement of waving a wand, the person moves covertly. During those years of participating in professional competitions, Professor Flitwick encountered many opponents who graduated from Wagadu, so he summarized the tips for dealing with such opponents. A simple force-relaxing and energy-releasing spell will make their muscles unable to lift energy, and 9 times out of 10, it will play the role of Forbidden Demon. Sure enough, when Professor Flitwick cast a spell, the 2 vampires were suddenly in chaos. Because they have lost control of their muscles, it becomes very difficult for them to cast even simple spells. So, when the 2 lions pounced on them, they could only fight with their bare hands. To sum it up in one word, miserable. School, principal, I also want to help. Quirrell, who has always been a little transparent, also spoke at this time and took the initiative to ask for help. A long rope slipped from his sleeve, winding like a long snake, and soon swam to the vampires. Quirrell raised his two arms like a band conductor, holding the wand in his right hand to guide the direction of the rope. His left hand kept rubbing around the wand, controlling the twisting and turning of the rope, and quickly wrapped it around the three people. Not. Hey, hey. With a short sound coming from Quirrell's mouth, his left hand flicked hard on the wand, and the rope was instantly locked. The three vampires were strung together by a rope and pulled together by a huge force, collapsing back to back on the ground. Professor Flitwick's eyes lit up and he couldn't help but praise his former student and current colleague, a wonderful compound spell that combines the levitation spell, the summoning spell and the transfiguration spell. Quirinus, to be honest, your progress has exceeded my expectations. Thank you very much for the book you recommended, the illustrated version of Rope Art and Magic in the Hogwarts Library. I couldn't put it down recently. However, apart from Quirrell's former headmaster, only Dumbledore gave him a symbolic nod of approval. The other two professors, Snape and McGonagall, saw that the rebellious vampire had been caught, and now they had no intention of caring about anything else. They were all worried about the young Gryffindor wizard who had been sent to the hospital wing. The difference is that Professor McGonagall is worried about everyone, while Snape is mainly worried about one of the little lions. When the vampire was caught, Professor McGonagall turned the lion back into a porcelain vase, and used the transformation technique to quickly restore the terrain of the place. The headmaster of Slytherin simply shook off the arm held by Dumbledore, strode down the stairs, pointed his wand at the trapped vampires, and they immediately floated in front of him. Who are you? Who asked you to come to Hogwarts to attack those little wizards? Chapter 62. Bourne saves Kettleborn. Following the pony into the Forbidden Forest, he soon heard the crackling sound of a magic spell and the roar of a ferocious beast. Although it was diluted by the rain, there was still a faint smell of blood in the air, and the smell was very fresh, unlike the cow blood they put here as bait during the day. When he quietly approached the clearing where the Thestrals lived, he hid behind a privet tree and looked around, only to realize that the wizard who released the spell was Professor Kettleborn. At this time, he was having a fight with a very plump monsters are fighting. The reason why I use the word plump to describe it is because although this monster has an extremely ferocious face and is naked, it doesn't look like a human being at all, but her bulging front and back are the body shape still shows obvious female biological characteristics. However, this monster is definitely not a color-changing ghoul, the guess he made during the day has now been proven. However, proof is proof, even Bourne couldn't recognize what this thing was. Even if he searched through the memories in his mind, he couldn't figure out what kind of magical animal this monster was, or what kind of strange dark magical creature it was. This guy, who was being besieged by Professor Kettleborn and the Thestrals, showed too many characteristics of different species in Bourne's eyes. She stands on a pair of hoof-shaped feet, but she is not a pawnlock, a magical creature that likes to take care of the horses, but if the horses do not accept it, it may retaliate against the horses, because the head of the pawnlock is generally it is in the shape of a horse or a donkey. When she stands upright, she is over 3 meters tall. She has a hunched body and looks a bit like a werewolf, but she does not have the trademark thick hair on her body. From time to time, she would open her mouth and spit out flames at Professor Kettleborn, like a fire dragon, but she was definitely not the 10 kinds of pure blood recorded in Monsters and Their Origins, the authoritative book on the classification of magical animals. Any kind of fire dragon. This seems like a platter, like a hodgepodge. Looking at the appearance of this female monster, Bourne couldn't help but have a suspicion that made him uneasy, uncomfortable, and a little angry. Could this guy be a human being? Just like that kind of black magic creature like 5-legged monster. Moreover, if she was a human before, she just abandoned the honor of being a human being and voluntarily became a monster in order to achieve certain goals. Under the Emperor's watchful eye, Bourne as an Astartes felt the need to usurp some of the responsibilities of the Inquisition. He even came up with a reason at the speed of light, the sword has no eyes, and the machine soul of the chain sword suddenly became ill and killed someone on its own. How can it be said that it was his fault? The plan goes through. It is worth noting that even when Inquisitors are performing tasks, necessary procedures must be in place. Some cannot adhere to procedural justice and exercise too much subjective initiative. For example, they do not ask the High Lord of Terra to sign an extermination order, arrogantly dropping cyclone torpedoes or virus bombs. Any judge who dares to do that will usually end up with a blackened file, or simply no such person. Therefore, Bourne felt that even if he could not find someone who could apply for an extermination order, he would at least have to find some definite evidence. And what happened next proved that when the Astartes, as an extension of the Emperor's will, do something right, they will most likely be guided and even favored by fate. Damn human! The monster roared, and she received a swoon released by Kettleben. Bourne's heart felt evidence is here. However, perhaps it is because Kettleburn's spell is not strong enough, or perhaps because this monster, like some magical animals, has skin with extremely high magic resistance, so after being cast by the spell, in addition to a cluster of particles erupting from the surface of the skin, Mars, she showed no signs of fainting. Kettleben pointed his wand at her and yelled, "Who are you? Why did you break into the forbidden forest of Hogwarts, and why did you attack these innocent Thestrals in a frenzy?" The female monster did not answer his question. Madeline has been suffering from blood addiction recently, but this does not mean that she has lost her brain. She and her companions spent a lot of effort to get in. Hogwarts Castle can't let all the hard work go to waste just because of a trivial matter. Yes, this Madeline is an accomplice of Kambauer and the others, and she is also an Wagadu graduate who became a vampire. However, she has gone further than Kambauer and the others. This woman not only invites the expected, yes, Quirrell is one of them, to her room to watch exciting programs, she is also a proficient the witch who transformed herself and used various African potions. The idea and the specific process of turning the group into vampires were all made by Madeline. The situation at that time was that, facing the encirclement and suppression by the French Ministry of Magic, their group was forced to hide in the sewers of Paris for 3 full months. Someone asked, why not just dissipate and leave? The answer is, they won't. Wagadu's magic education is somewhat partial, and even wizards who have graduated normally have not received training in apparition. And if you want to participate in the special training courses offered by the French Ministry of Magic, the British Ministry of Magic also has such training courses. It is obviously even more impossible for Kambauer and Madeline to be criminals. Under the pressure of survival, Madeline relied on magic potions and the skills of Wagadu's version of Animagus to turn herself and others into vampires. The transformation she designed is somewhat similar to the Animagus that transforms into magical animals, but it is like the hyped room temperature superconductivity. Although it looks similar, the result is not the same at all. And, just like the wizard who once experimented with the magical animal Animagus, soon after escaping from the pursuit of the French Ministry of Magic, their group discovered the drawbacks of transformation. Yes, that's right, their vampire transformation seemed to be successful, but it turned out that this transformation had huge side effects. A real vampire can meet his survival needs by drinking plasma once a week on average without feeling hungry. And if blood with magic power is used as food, such as fire dragon blood and Remox blood, which are usually sold as potion ingredients, they can eat for months or even a whole year without feeling hungry. But Madeline and Kambauer's gang, even if they drink magic blood, even the blood of a wizard, blood addiction will still plague them. If they don't drink the magical blood once a week, they will get sick every week. Some people may ask, if they use that blood as food, or at most eat more frequently, aren't they just like normal vampires? But the reality is that this problem is huge. First of all, as mentioned above, the magic-rich blood available on the market is basically a potion material. Their price is very high. 4 vampires drink 5 or 6 pounds of blood every week, even the cheaper fire dragon blood. This is also thanks to Dumbledore, who published Dragon's Blood when he was young. 12 uses, which prompted the emergence of fire dragon sanctuaries and commercial dragon farms, which also requires about 200 galleons. For reference, the average salary of staff at the British Ministry of Magic is almost over 100 galleons. In this regard, it is still relying on those first-line Aurors who earn a slightly higher salary than the Minister of Magic to raise the average salary level of the Ministry of Magic. Chapter 63. The blood of wizards is rich in magic power. Because she was about to taste Kettleburn's blood, Madeline was so excited that she even squinted her eyes in preparation for a good taste. But at this moment, a ray of light suddenly lit up in the woods not far away, and then Madeline felt a warmth on her face. After several days of research, Bourne already has some insights into the variation of the curse, and the use of all petrified has theoretical support. Praise be to the Emperor! He prayed inwardly. And as he prayed, the petrification spell, which was originally not as powerful as fainting, actually evolved into a move commonly used by the Astartes think tank, Chinook lightning. The plasma, as thick as an arm, hit Madeline's face, which had completely transformed into a monster, turning her entire face into charcoal. At the same time, Bourne also held up the chain sword that was already loyal and thirsty, and rushed in front of the monster like a divine weapon descending from the sky. Praise be to O.M. Messiah! The chain sword roared, and the Yeki wandering around were frightened by this momentum and involuntarily let out a whispering sound. LOL. The rapidly rotating saw teeth swiped across Madeline's wrist, making a sound like a sharp blade cutting cooked cowhide. However, the alchemical chainsword still proved its loyalty and successfully cut off one of Madeline's wrists. Arm. Professor Ketleben, who was seriously injured, fell to the ground together with the monster's palm that was dug into his shoulder. Bang! The dizzy old wizard didn't realize what happened, but in a flash, the monster uglier than a dominatrix took off on the spot, and then hit the ground a few meters away. Bourne is a dual-wielding warrior. Just now, he not only used the chainsword to cut off the monster's arm, but also used the wand that transformed into Astartes Magus and became like an adamantine scepter to severely hit Madeline's head. If ordinary Astartes recruits attack the enemy with their fists in close combat, the result will usually be 30-70. After 3 punches, the enemy will be killed. As for the think tanks in the chapter, even though they are known as think tanks because of their ability to control psychic powers, in fact they are Astartes who can become think tanks. The hidden identity of each of them is a veteran of the chapter. They are all very good at using the psychic scepter hydrogen to wake up the sleeping minds of demons or aliens, and often just one knock is enough to make the enemy busy with the first 7 tasks. Bourne's blow to the head performed an operation on Madeline's head that was burned by the plasma, and her head was directly transformed into an M shape. However, perhaps due to the bloodline buffs of vampires and several other magical animals, Madeline, who was so severely injured, was not completely dead. Moreover, her brain, which had been beaten out of shape, could still be used. After rolling on the ground, this guy's skin was stained with a layer of green, his body shrunk a lot, and his back was slightly hunched, like a hunchback. Her mouth gradually changed into the shape of a bird's beak, a layer of fleshy membrane grew between her fingers and toes, and the depression on her head became somewhat natural. Through self-transformation, Madeline used another buff she had created and turned into a monster similar to the magical animal Kappa. More importantly, in this way, she seemed to have temporarily suppressed the injury to her head, preventing herself from becoming a prey. A cunning enemy. Bourne made his judgment immediately. However, the more cunning the enemy appears, the more determined the Astartes will generally be to eradicate it. So when Madeline overturned an adult Thestral that was trying to attack her and swerved into the bushes, Bourne gave chase. Because his ribs were broken and his wand was not in his hand, Professor Ketleben, who could only lie on the lawn and moan, looked at the figure who was somewhat similar to Hagrid but much younger, and forced himself to yell out a question. "Who are you?" Bourne replied without looking back, "I am the Emperor's Angel of Death. And Hagrid makes delicious rock cakes." Horace taught him that when in conflict with people in the magical world, try not to reveal your name if possible. Names are magical, and some powerful dark wizards can use the names of their enemies to curse, so, Bourne did not directly answer the old professor's question. However, Bourne felt that the sentence "Hagrid's rock biscuits are delicious" was probably enough. Although he seemed a little too naive and reckless at some times, he was able to get 65 job checks in the 62 years of teaching at Hogwarts Castle. This record has not been broken yet, and still not be expelled. Ketleben, in fact, he is a very wise wizard. The result was indeed the case. Ketleben thought about it for a moment. So far, he had only met one person except Hagrid himself who had said that the rock biscuits are delicious. It's that little wizard. The old wizard remembered Bourne's name, but he also had a doubt in his heart. Isn't this little guy the grandson of Dean Slughorn? Why does he seem to be related to Hagrid? Just as Professor Ketleben was thinking about Hagrid and his family tree, accompanied by the barking of dogs and the rustling of bushes being pushed away, the warden and guard of the Forbidden Forest of Hogwarts held a crossbow in his hand. The keykeeper and the big dog named Yaya also came to the forest clearing where the Thestrals lived. Professor Ketleben. Hagrid obviously had the ability to see at night. He didn't carry any lighting tools in his hand, but he could still see clearly who the old man lying on the lawn was at a glance. Seeing the bloodstains on the ground and several injured adult Thestrals around him, this big man with a gentle heart that was completely different from his rough appearance suddenly became confused and overwhelmed. He ran to the old professor in a few steps. Not caring about keeping any secrets, he pulled out the umbrella that was too small for his large frame from his coat pocket, and then pointed it at the old professor's shoulder. The bloody wound was treated briefly. "It's okay, Hagrid, don't panic." Professor Ketleben wanted to say that he could take care of his injuries by asking Hagrid to retrieve his wand. However, Hagrid didn't listen to him and stretched out his hand to pick up the old professor from the ground. Because his ribs were broken, this time, the old wizard couldn't help but let out a cry of pain. "Professor, hold on, I'll take you to Principal Dumbledore." With that said, Hagrid picked up Professor Kettleben and started running towards the outside of the Forbidden Forest. At the same time, he did not forget to say to the big dog Yaya who was following him, "Yaya, you stay here. Some of the little guys in the Yeki group are injured, you just stay here to protect them." The old professor, who was held in Hagrid's arms in a princess hug position, was in so much pain that he was speechless because of his fracture. He slapped the big man's arm several times, trying to make him stop being so reckless and put him down first, but Hagrid thought it was because the old professor was seriously injured and his body was twitching involuntarily. Chapter 64. Throwing the monster's head aside, Bourne walked straight to the cave she pointed out, which was not far from the place where the monster was executed. She almost escaped into her lair. The entrance to the cave was blocked by a large stone and covered with winding vines. It was indeed difficult to tell anything from the outside. "Open sesame." He tried the unlocking spell that was different from Open the Ilaho hole that Professor McGonagall taught in the club today. As if being pulled by some invisible hands, the vines covering the rock were torn to pieces in an instant. The rock trembled twice, and then flew out of the hole like an oak cork on a wine bottle, fell to the hillside, and rolled down the hillside. As the outside air re-entered, the stinky gas accumulated in the cave also found a new outlet, and soon floated out of the cave. A trace of murderous intent flashed in Bourne's eyes. This smell was 100% the smell of corpses, and he was even sure that those corpses must belong to humans. Looking back at the monster he had decapitated, and staring into the monster's dead eyes, Bourne couldn't help but whisper, "You really didn't die unjustly." In the eyes of the loyal Astartes, aliens and heretics are guilty of original sin, and if they dare to slaughter humans, they are even more heinous, and death will not be a pity. Lumos. Summoning a ball of light with his wand, Bourne immediately walked into the cave. He estimated that this cave should have been a habitat for wild brown bears. Although there were no wild bears in the British Isles after about the 12th century, due to the active isolation of wizards from muggles, there may still be wild brown bears surviving around some places where wizards gather. When he was taken to visit the Forbidden Forest in the morning, Hagrid told him that in addition to magical animals, there were also some ordinary animals living in the Forbidden Forest. However, with those magical animals as companions, even the brown bear at the top of the food chain sometimes has to give in and admit defeat. That's why they chose their cave on a small hill far away from the forest, food source. As a result, as soon as Madeline arrived, she drove away the brown bears that lived here, and Josanne Magpie Nest regarded this place as her foothold. In addition to the traces of life left by the original owner, Bourne also saw the trap Madeline had prepared for him, 7 zombies half buried in the ground, with only half of their bodies exposed. Zombies are not inferi. The latter are undead controlled by the summons of black magic. They are lifeless, soulless, and thoughtless, afraid of fire and light, and like darkness and dampness, just like the Walking Dead. The zombie is a kind of black magic creature with a short life cycle, or it can be said to be a biological alchemy product. Their raw materials are ordinary people who have died, and then they are soaked with magic potions by wizards to give them mobility again. Making zombies is a traditional magic practiced by African wizards, and this technology was not divided into good and evil at first. However, some evil dark wizards later chose to kill muggles directly with poisonous potions, and then used the poison spread throughout the corpses to complete the production of zombies, also euphemistically called voodoo zombies. In fact, it is just to control costs, which can be said to be the ultimate black heart. Although they have no mind or soul like the inferi, zombies are not afraid of fire and light. The only problem is that they will rot over time and turn back into corpses. Therefore, due to the limited shelf life, zombies can generally only be used first. At this time, the zombies in this cave are still inactive. Bourne checked the clothes of these poor people and found that they should all be Muggle wanderers. Moreover, their bodies were shriveled up unnaturally, and there were obvious bite marks on the neck arteries. That monster is a vampire. However, Bourne added in his mind, at least before turning into a monster. After thinking about it, he decided to report the whole thing to Dumbledore instead of burning the place directly. Although if he does this, he may receive some criticism, for example, why is he so cruel at such a young age? At the same time, he may also face many questions, for example, how could you do such a cruel thing at such a young age? However, Bourne still wanted to give these poor people some final dignity. Even if most of them are homeless, not only wizards, but even their Muggle monarchs will not care too much about their deaths. You don't care, but I care, and the great Emperor cares too. Bourne said to himself in his heart. And when his idea just came up, the lighting spell suspended on the scepter seemed to be affected. Not only did the lumens increase dramatically, the lighting spell became brighter, but even the light emitted changed from cold fluorescence to a warm beam of light. The illuminating spell illuminated the entire cave, bathing it in light. Bourne could not help but empathize with him and recited a prayer that impressed him. The Candle Emperor's will destroy the monsters in the cave. As if in response to these words, all the zombies swept by the light trembled slightly, and a hazy grey mist continued to escape from their bodies. In the holy light, these grey mist gradually disappeared without a trace, seeming to be purified. However, unlike this situation, which was like ice and snow melting under the warm sun, there was a violent reaction like a burning fire cooking oil when one place in the cave was illuminated by light. It was a women's suitcase. At this time, under the holy light, it began to spontaneously ignite. When the leather on the surface of the suitcase was burned through, accompanied by a burning smell caused by burnt protein, Bourne actually smelled another smell, a familiar smell that made him extremely disgusted. The smell of demons and death. Scenes suddenly appeared in Bourne's mind. At that time, he continued to kill in the subspace, bringing final and eternal death to these guys who were difficult to completely eliminate, usually could only be expelled, in the material world. Whenever a daemon is slain in the warp, their body and soul quickly disintegrate and reintegrate into the essence of the warp. At that time, Bourne always smelled a special smell. Although the smell he smelled at this time was slightly different from the smell emitted when the devil died, this familiarity still made his nerves alert as if an electric current had passed through. However, despite being vigilant, he was actually a little bit excited. With chainsword and scepter in hand, Bourne walked towards the burning flame. As the scepter emitting holy light continued to approach, the flames burned more intensely. The contents of the suitcase, a change of women's clothes, a notebook, several thick magic books, and 3 or 4 reagent bottles filled with red liquid. At this time, they also began to burn with the flames. Everything looks normal. But this normality itself is very abnormal. Bourne is ready to use psychic lightning, all petrified, to give any old friend who may show up a familiar blow at any time. As for the chain sword, although it had just drunk the monster's blood, it was so loyal that it would never mind taking a demon as a snack after the meal, and besides, that meal was a main meal. It's still unclear, for its enemies, its hunger can never be satiated. Chapter 65. Dumbledore walked out of the castle gate alone. He rejected Fudge's opinion and asked all the Aurors who had just arrived to stay in Hogwarts. He wants to go to the Forbidden Forest alone to find Bourne. And soon after the principal left, Quirrell ran back to his office on the grounds that he had to go to a specific bathroom to go to the toilet smoothly. Quirrell closed the door, untied his turban with his backhand, and couldn't wait to advise his master, "Master, now is a good opportunity." Dumbledore left, and several other professors were busy cleaning up the mess. "We can go find the magic stone now." However, Voldemort, who always urged him to find the Philosopher's Stone in the past, did not show the same enthusiasm as before. Quirinus. Rarely, he did not use the word idiot instead of Quillo, and even called Quirrell's name tenderly. "Yes, yes, yes, Master." Being called this by him, Quirrell unconsciously stuttered again, which was exactly the effect Voldemort wanted. Fear is Voldemort's only means of controlling him. He must keep Quirrell in awe of him at all times. Especially in his current state, if Quirrell loses his fear and dares to risk everything, there is still a way to completely eliminate his remaining soul. Therefore, he must act strategizing and inscrutable, and can only live as a solid actor until he is resurrected. "Have you ever seen a fox catch a rabbit?" Voldemort asked. "Rabbit, rabbit, rabbit." Quirrell was puzzled. When a fox finds a rabbit hole, if it is stupid enough to put its head directly into the hole, it will either get stuck there directly, or it will get lost in the messy underground passages dug by the rabbit. Voldemort spoke vividly, as if he had actually seen a similar scene. However, if the fox is smart enough, it will bark a few times at the entrance of the hole. If a rabbit emerges from another hole, it will block the rabbit back, and then bark a few more times at the new entrance. The cycle starts again and again, causing the rabbit to run away exhausted. After a few times, the rabbit will be so frightened that it will become dizzy, run away, and may even scare itself to death. At that time, the fox can easily catch the rabbit and enjoy the fruits of his victory. Quirrell seemed to understand. Voldemort simply made it clear, now, all you have to do is be a smart fox and let the rabbit come out to die on its own. Quirrell's eyes lit up. He completely understood this time and understood what his master wanted him to do next. However, the story Voldemort told him about the rabbit and the fox was only half of the complete story. In the remaining half, the protagonist is the hunter. When he was in the orphanage, in order to earn pocket money by catching and skinning foxes, Voldemort often went out to dig fake rabbit holes and lured smart foxes to run back and forth between the fake holes. When the fox is tired, Voldemort will come over with a wooden stick to recuperate the hard-working fox, and collect its fox skin at the same time. Feeling Quirrell's thoughts pop up, just like seeing a fox working hard, Voldemort couldn't help but say hey hey happily. Yes, that's it, very good, very energetic. Voldemort encouraged all the thoughts of his slave fox. Quirrell, on the other hand, seemed to be suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. Instead, he felt a trace of gratitude from the bottom of his heart to Voldemort, who had been persecuting him. He even looked at the spiked whip hanging on the bedside. Voldemort used it to punish him. His props, none of them are as dazzling and scary as before. This pair of shackles is made of cast iron. I weighed it, and it's exactly 15 pounds, no more, no less. Hanging up the person who made the mistake and wearing it, the feeling is, tisk tisk. This stick is imported from the Caribbean. It is made of poisonous lacquer wood, and the spikes on it are all natural. Use it to hit the prisoner's body, and the toxins of the poisonous lacquer wood can penetrate into the skin. Causes heart-wrenching pain. This is a soldering iron, this is a pinboard, this is a vise for tooth extraction, this is Mrs. Loris's cat-teasing stick, you can put this aside. In the office, Filch took off pieces of his collection from the wall like treasures and introduced their uses to Snape in detail. Although Filch is just the janitor of Hogwarts, his office is very spacious, and his office is also the only faculty office located in the corridor on the first floor. And according to legend, this office was actually the principal's office arranged by a certain Gryffindor principal more than 600 years ago, that's why it's so spacious. The reason why the principal didn't want to work on the 8th floor was because he proposed a slogan, the principal guards the school gate. Of course, there is no way to know the authenticity of this legend now, because when he was in office, the headmaster thought that compiling Hogwarts, a school history was troublesome and a waste of money, so he only selected a few things during his tenure. Big event was written into the school history. However, if you just look at the waste-style decoration style of this office, it is difficult to believe that it is real. This office does not even have a window, there is a side where the window should be. Against the thick wall, there is a row of iron filing cabinets, which contain files on students' disciplinary records. In the middle of this row of cabinets, there is a large drawer painted red, with the nameplate confiscated materials, highly dangerous hanging on it. This is what Filch prepared alone for the Weasley twins 2 years ago. Freed up. In addition to filing cabinets, this office, which is even larger than half a basketball court, only contains a single bed, a small bedside table, and a desk made of wood replaced by student desks. And a rattan cat climbing frame that almost touches the ceiling. A simple iron-framed oil lamp hung from the ceiling of the office, a fire was burning in the hearth of the fireplace, and there were many roasted dried fish hanging on the shelves above the fireplace. Perhaps because he often made grilled fish for himself and Mrs. Loris, the whole office was filled with the smell of grilled fish. The most numerous things in this office are the execution props that are hung neatly on the walls and are in excellent condition. As Filch continued to introduce, Snape just kept an expressionless face. But Cumbar and the 3 vampires, after hearing these words that were infinitely close to the 404 warning, their faces turned pale as if they had been put on a wall. Please go out first. Perhaps because he was tired of Filch's chattering, or perhaps he was disdainful of the torture tools used by Muggles, Snape finally spoke and invited the janitor out. He was left alone. Facing being fixed, yes, not tied but fixed, because Snape thought it was too troublesome, so when he used the transfiguration to create 3 sets of frames, he did not create a rope along the way, but directly conjuring a few iron nails to nail them to the cross, the 3 vampires dared not move. Snape raised his wand and recited a spell. Chapter 66. Dean Snape, we may need to ask you to cooperate and come back to the Ministry of Magic with us. Scrimgeour said. What he said sounded like he was negotiating, but when he took out his wand, he was actually giving an order. Moreover, the Aurors who came to Hogwarts with him also gathered around, vaguely surrounding Snape. Faced with this situation, Snape did not explain anything for himself. He just said, "There are not enough manpower in the school now. I need to wait for Dumbledore to come back before I can follow you." Scrimgeour stared into Snape's eyes. After looking at each other for a few seconds, the head of the Auror office nodded, agreeing to Snape's request. However, he asked Snape not to leave his sight. As for collecting the wand, Scrimgeour did not mention it. Because he felt that with so many Aurors present, Snape, a young wizard in his early 30s, could not make any splash. However, when he brought Snape to the banquet hall, he looked up and saw that his old boss, Barty Crouch, was the former director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, also arrived at Huo Huo with a group of people. Schwoz! He saw Secretary Fudge again. Although the two groups of people can't be said to get along well with each other, they can be said to stand on clear terms. Scrimgeour couldn't help but feel a headache. Compared to the two heroes meeting scene he had to deal with next, he even felt that what would happen even if Professor Snape used the unforgivable curse? Could this really send a Hogwarts headmaster to Azkaban? After all, the subjects being tortured were just 3 vampires who had committed serious crimes, and what's more, those guys had identity certificates issued by the French Ministry of Magic. What he is about to face are some wizards who may fight at any time, and they are also colleagues from the Ministry of Magic who he sees every day without looking up. What should I do? Waiting online is quite urgent. In fact, even if he is unwilling to admit it, Scrimgeour is like a mirror in his heart. He knows what the optimal solution to this situation is. There is one person who can suppress these two groups of people at the same time. He has the strength, literally, but the problem is that that person is not in the castle now. But he didn't know that Dumbledore, the old wizard known as the strongest in the magical world, also had doubts about his own strength at this time. Using the variant spell of the Flying Curse, after entering the Forbidden Forest, Dumbledore quickly summoned a series of foggy figures glowing with dark golden light. These were the figures that Bourne had left for some time in the past. Traces of the people below, follow them all the way. And when he walked to the hill where Madeline was hiding before, and saw the monster that had turned into a monster with a missing head, and then came to the cave where golden light was constantly spewing out, he found that he could not walk at all. Go in. He even used all curses are ended by himself, although the spells and effects are very similar to Curse Stop. The difference is that Curse Stop can be fired by one wizard to stop another wizard from casting spells. The spell, all spells are ended, requires many wizards to cast together. This many is usually at least 5 or more, and they all need to be wizards with high magic power. However, when all curses end acted on the barrier composed of golden light, Dumbledore immediately felt that his spell was melting away as quickly as snow in spring. In the end, in order to ensure the safety of the little wizard Bourne, he could only bite the bullet and walk into the cave. However, as soon as he put the Elder Wand into the light to test it, the wand with the same reputation as the strongest immediately conveyed to him great indignation and dissatisfaction, as well as a feeling so grand that it could not be described in words. Feelings. It felt like hundreds of millions of people were praying in unison, and it felt like thousands of demons were howling at the same time. It felt like being in the warm amniotic fluid of the mother's body, and it felt like being thrown into the cold deep space of the universe to wander alone. Revered and feared. 2 completely opposite emotions, working together, strongly stimulated Dumbledore's nerves at the same time, instantly taking over the mind of this man who had lived for more than 100 years and had become less prone to joy and sorrow. Just by touching the light a little, he even had the illusion that hundreds of thousands of years had passed. How could he walk in? It feels very similar to last time. Recalling what happened when he tried to peek into the little wizard Bourne's mind a year ago, Dumbledore couldn't help but rub his swollen temples. Perhaps because the light was too bright, his eyelids hidden behind half-moon lenses were slightly closed. But it's much stronger. Is this caused by the little guy Bourne himself, or was he stimulated by some magic? Although some people in the wizarding world secretly always refer to this old wizard as the White Devil, as opposed to the Dark Lord, which means that Dumbledore actually relied on strength and resourcefulness to convince others, but he did not use black magic. Magic, of course, that doesn't mean he can't, is it? What they want to express is, after all, the White Devil is actually the devil, but his behavior is slightly different from that of the Dark Lord. Dumbledore didn't refute this at all. Whether publicly or privately, he even felt that those people were not necessarily slandering him. Because everything they say is true. However, the real difference between the White Devil and the Dark Lord is that Dumbledore has his own conscience and bottom line. After defeating Grindelwald, with his strength and reputation, he clearly has the opportunity to become the real leader of the Ministry of Magic in several European countries and lead the future development of the magical world according to his own plans. However, in the end, he did not choose this path of enslaving all wizards in disguise, and left the future of wizards to all wizards. After discovering Tom Riddle's problem, he was fully capable of nipping the hidden danger in the bud, or he could do it more covertly and induce Tom Riddle to become an obscurus. However, he still brought Voldemort, who was just an orphan at the time, back to Hogwarts, hoping that education would change his nature. It is precisely because of this that in Dumbledore's life, he did many things that had good intentions and made no mistakes in the process, but the results were very different from expectations. In fact, Dumbledore sometimes wondered whether the reason why he was attracted to Grindelwald was because of some kind of magic at work. Magic obeyed the wizard's will, and the will deep in his heart had actually always been expected. Then he can also have a pair of eyes that can glimpse the future. However, he would eventually convince himself that it was all his own illusion. A bright future should never belong to him alone. Everyone should have the power to control their own life. This time is no exception. Although the pressure Bourne brought to him was no less than that of Tom Riddle, he still hoped that Bourne would have a bright future of his own. Maybe it's just a little too bright. Dumbledore muttered rather self-deprecatingly. The golden light stimulated him so much that he couldn't help but cover his eyes with the back of his hand. However, although Lumen became stronger, his powerful magic intuition told him that what was happening in the cave was not a bad thing, and the whole thing had reached the stage where it should end. Chapter 67. There are two major factions in the Ministry of Magic, the Conservatives represented by Barty Crouch, and the Neoliberals represented by Cornelius Fudge. Due to the recent attack, the main figures from both factions were basically here now, gathering in the banquet hall of Hogwarts. In order to take care of the emotions of these big shots, the house elves in the Hogwarts kitchen worked overtime, not only preparing more exquisite dinners and desserts for them, but also lighting beeswax candles that are usually used in sorting ceremonies. This kind of candle is very bright and has little smoke. When lit, it will emit a light honey fragrance. Your Excellency, Minister, we must have a frank discussion. There are some problems with the decision you proposed. Barty Crouch went straight to the point. Not long after he arrived at Hogwarts, in front of the current Minister Fudge, he instructed his former subordinate Scrimgeour, the director of the Auror office, to send several Aurors to bring all the people who had nothing to do with this temporary closed-door meeting. The reporters invited by Secretary Umbridge were all packed up and sent to Hogsmeade Village, and then he personally supervised them to board the night bus back to London. It is precisely because of this that neoliberal people, including Fudge, don't look very good now. This guy simply doesn't take me as a minister seriously. Fudge was roaring inwardly. If someone used legilimency on him, they would find that the minister was repeating all the curses he knew in his mind. What's the problem? Do we have enough evidence? As he spoke, Fudge threw the evidence in his mouth on the long table. A nameplate that says Made in France, 3 pieces of identification issued by the French Ministry of Magic confirming that it is not forged. Crouch, what your Department of International Magical Cooperation has to do is use this evidence to confront those French guys. Make them compensate for their losses and nail them to the pillar of shame in history. Once again. Faced with Fudge's anger, Barty Crouch responded, history is always the victory of ruthlessness over brainlessness. These words confused some people, and those who understood did not dare to stand up and loudly criticize Barty Crouch's choice of words, because no one here wanted to be called brainless. Your Excellency Minister, you may be from the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters, and you are very good at cleaning up Muggle memories, but you don't quite understand the way wizards communicate internationally. Crouch chose to directly expose Fudge's background, the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters, one of the fringe departments of the Ministry of Magic. Since the Ministry of Magic was founded in 1707, only 2 people, including Fudge, have climbed all the way from this fringe department to the position of minister. Fudge's senior was named Leonard Spencer Moon. When he joined the job, he was just an unknown person serving tea and water in the Department of Magical Accidents and Disasters. Therefore, even after he became the Minister of Magic, some people still called him Fudge behind his back. T-boy. However, it is worth mentioning that Minister Moon's greatest achievement during his tenure was to solve and quell a series of troubles caused by the Dark Lord Grindelwald who succeeded his predecessor. It is said that as the Minister of Magic, he also maintained a good relationship with the Muggle Prime Minister Churchill at the time. Moreover, there were rumors at the time that Moon became the Minister of Magic with the support of Dumbledore. Just like Fudge now. Excuse me, do you know how the International Federation of Wizards operates? Barty Crouch stood up from the table and straightened his royal blue tie. He did not expect Fudge and his gang to answer this question, but gave his own explanation. The International Federation of Wizards is a group of people with the organizational ability of Italians, the flexibility of Germans, the humility of Frenchmen, and the combination of a meeting of wizarding officials with Belgian imagination, Dutch generosity, and Irish intelligence. Even the proposal to standardize weights and measures for potions has been discussed repeatedly in this meeting for more than 30 years. During the day today, I just attended the 249th meeting on the standardization of potions weights and measures. Do you know what will happen to us if, as you say, we take this accusation to the International Confederation of Wizards and accuse the French Ministry of Magic? The endless wrangling is just the most basic. The more critical question is, do we have that much budget to support this international lawsuit? Once a dispute is opened, there must be a result. You know, a half-finished farce will not only weaken the authority of the British Ministry of Magic, but also cost a lot of money in the sunk costs invested before and in the aftermath. The only people who can benefit are the goblins in Gringotts. They will be lenient when charging fees. Speaking of excitement, Barty Crouch clapped his hands on the long table and made a loud pop sound. Is this the result you want, Mr. Minister? Just like when playing wizard chess, the queen rushes all the way to the bottom. Barty Crouch directly ended the conversation with a single queen kills the king move. You. Fudge was choked and couldn't breathe. He pointed at his old rival and kept pointing. Seeing this, Chief Secretary Umbridge hurriedly poured a glass of pumpkin juice for the minister. She was really afraid that her supporter would suddenly be angry to death here. Director Crouch. While serving her boss a drink, the famous Pink Lady of the Ministry of Magic shouted at Barty Crouch with a sharp voice. You are the director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. It is your job to resolve issues related to disputes with the Ministry of Magic of other countries, and even issues that are suspected to be related. You denied it so simply and neatly. Do you have any other solutions? Plan? Don't tell me that you, a dignified director, can only deny, and deny again. You can only say one sentence. What is the difference between you and a magic doll? It can only be said that people of Fudge's group also have political wisdom consistent with their background. Unlike conservative representatives like Barty Crouch, who is also one of the Holy 20,8 pure blood families, because people in the family have held high positions in the Ministry of Magic for generations, they have no understanding of the various operating methods of the Ministry of Magic. They are all well understood, and it is easy to find some routines to deal with problems. However, these neoliberals in the Ministry of Magic are very skilled in fighting. Many times, they are more open-minded, even if they use methods that may seem embarrassing to the established wizard families, they are willing to cause some trouble for their enemies. Umbridge is a typical example. Like a shrew, she directly labeled Barty Crouch as someone who can only deny others and has no ability to solve practical problems. In a sense, this is actually quite powerful, and Barty Crouch was indeed very angry with her. And for the sake of face, he couldn't say anything more to a witch, because that would look very ungentlemanly. He can only pretend to be calm, and then propose a practical solution to save his respect. When dealing with similar problems, the British Ministry of Magic actually has a long history of follow-through, and we usually adopt a 4-step plan. Chapter 68. Dumbledore is back. Just like a guest who suddenly broke into someone else's home and saw the host returning, all the guests from the Ministry of Magic in the banquet hall stood up from their seats. Headmaster Dumbledore. They all said hello to Dumbledore, just like when they went to school here, and even ignored the little wizard standing behind Dumbledore for a while. Kumbar and the others, who had been shouting injustice just now, suddenly closed their mouths tightly because the noses of these 3 vampires were much more sensitive than the others present and they could smell some smells. But soon, everyone present at the Ministry of Magic experienced the same treatment as them. Bourne simply threw the loot onto the long table. These officials also instantly understood why the aurors following the old man and the young man all turned pale. The monster's head, which was still dripping with blood, had obviously been chopped off not long ago, and was held in the hands of a child who was at most 11 or 12 years old. This scene is also a bit scary. Principal Dumbledore, what's going on? Fudge walked past the crowd, came to Dumbledore, and asked. At this moment, he was acting braver than Barty Crouch, the only thing a real political animal fears is losing power. Of course, if his legs could stop trembling and his eyes could stop glancing at the long table, he would have performed better. These are the accomplices of those vampires. Snape suddenly spoke, and while speaking, the potions professor pushed away the Auror who was blocking him. The latter had just graduated from Hogwarts a few years ago, and was still afraid of the teacher who had taught him, so he did not make any counterattack. Snape walked to the long table, took out his wand and touched Madeline's head, and then looked at Dumbledore and Bourne in confusion. How did she become like this? Why did she have horns growing on her head, and how did I test the ingredients of magical animals? He did not say this directly, but used legilimency to communicate quickly with Dumbledore. I saw her appearance from the minds of those three guys. If it wasn't polyjuice potion or something, the monster's face was indeed that Madeline. Also, their group once had an affair with the mysterious man. We have had contact with each other. Although they came to Hogwarts to steal the Philosopher's Stone this time for themselves, we still cannot take it lightly. After all, that guy is very insidious. Thank you, Severus, I couldn't agree more with your judgment. Principal Dumbledore first responded to Snape in his mind, and then said to everyone present with a smile, "Welcome. My former students, welcome you back to Hogwarts today." Then, he nodded to Fudge again. "The monster you see is a group of those three vampires. I just discovered that in addition to attacking the little wizard in the castle, they also committed other evil deeds worthy of a Dementor's kiss. These monsters killed a bunch of poor muggles." "No, Albus, I mean to ask how this monster was decapitated." Fudge continued, thinking that Dumbledore just didn't understand what he meant. "This monster is me." As soon as Bourne opened his mouth to explain the reason why the monster was killed, Dumbledore interrupted him. "Yes." The old wizard used his loud voice to attract everyone's attention. "It was Mr. Slughorn who risked his life to save Professor Kettleben from our Care of Magical Creatures class in the Forbidden Forest. And the reason why he knew about this was because a Thestral foal he knew flew to Gryffindor Tower in the evening and asked him to help in the Forbidden Forest. You must also remember that when I was in school, I emphasized to you that the Forbidden Forest is very dangerous and no one is allowed to enter without permission." Dumbledore pointed his wand at the head on the long table and said, "Now you should believe it, how dangerous it is in the Forbidden Forest." "That's right," the principal said it all the time. Yes, that place is both eerie and terrifying. It is said that there are fire dragons and werewolf tribes living in the deepest part of the Forbidden Forest. Yes, I have a friend who went to the Forbidden Forest to collect pitcher plants. As a result, he had to take a break from school and go to St. Mungo's for a week. You have a friend. You didn't go to the Forbidden Forest by yourself, did you? Also, picking pitcher plants is not picking poisonous tentacles, so why did you end up in St. Mungo's? The Ministry of Magic officials present, regardless of faction, all followed Dumbledore's words and provided rational supplements to the principal. What is prestige? This is called prestige. Regardless of whether he is the Minister of Magic or the Director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, Dumbledore's words are not as effective as those of Hogwarts. Originally, Bourne thought that if he wanted to seek justice for the Muggle homeless people killed by vampires, he might have to bear some trouble. But then, Dumbledore said something again, and the Ministry of Magic officials present once again demonstrated what it means to have one call and 100 responses, and what the fan effect is. Some people took the initiative to contact the Muggle person in charge to investigate their identities. Some people volunteered to help arrange public cemeteries and funeral arrangements for these Muggle tramps. Some people began to condemn the three vampires of Cambar, and asked whether they should be handed over to the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures and the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Animals to be executed by scythe hands for more cruel physical executions, and soul capturing. Corresponding to the strange kiss. As for how to characterize this vampire attack and how to deal with the aftermath, Fudge and Crouch had just been tit for tat for a long time, each with their own demands, but in the end it was Dumbledore who made the decision. As the chairman of the International Confederation of Wizards, Dumbledore reported his other identity. "It is up to me to communicate with the French side and ask the French Ministry of Magic to conduct a special investigation, and then cooperate with the British Ministry of Magic or subsequent investigation results. Conducting 2 investigations into this group of vampire thugs. At the same time, in order to prevent conflicts between the British and French Ministries of Magic on how to impose sentences, he simply proposed a compromise. Since they have turned themselves into vampires, I suggest that they be handed over to the Vampire Association." "Punish. I will take the time to personally go to Berlin to communicate with the current leader of the vampires and let him deal with the prisoners fairly according to old customs. It is necessary to explain that the Vampire Association is not a strict management group for vampires. Some vampires have made small mistakes, and at most they will be lightly exposed with verbal warnings. However, if they are characterized as requiring the use of with old custom punishment, such a vampire would be dead. The only place where this old custom can reflect fairness and justice is that the methods of execution are different. Sometimes it is burned, sometimes it is impaled. In short, it depends on the situation. Similarly, Dumbledore once again received the support of almost everyone present. Although Crouch and Fudge were somewhat dissatisfied with this, they did not dare to raise it in public. It was not only against Dumbledore, but also against Dumbledore. All colleagues are on the opposite side. Chapter 69. Horace did not come empty-handed, he brought many gifts to Bourne. Before coming to Hogwarts, the old wizard asked the house elf Momo to take a VIP membership card and make a special trip to Honeydukes to spend a lot of money. However, thanks to his goods, all the little wizards who stayed in Madame Pomfrey's infirmary yesterday, as well as Neville and Seamus, each received a candy gift package. Even Ms. Granger, who is a dentist, happily accepted a gift box from Honeydukes, which contained several classic magics including Ice Mouse, Pepper Naughty, and Honey Candy. After about half an hour, it was confirmed that the little wizards were in good health. At the urging of Madame Pomfrey, the parents of the students who came to visit the patients were also gifted out of the medical room. Professor McGonagall invited them to have tea in his office, but Horace went to the 8th floor of the castle alone. It was estimated that Grandpa Horace would have to have a long talk with Principal Dumbledore. Feeling that he was clumsy and tongue-tied and unable to help, little Bourne slipped away to the library. Firstly to fulfill my duties as a librarian's assistant, and secondly to find some books to read. He now had a new doubt. Today is Sunday, and there were some disturbances yesterday, so there are only a few students borrowing and reading books in the library. Mrs. Pants simply left all the work to Bourne, and she took a book on the appreciation of magic portraits and sat on a seat near the window of the library to read to herself. It didn't take long for Bourne to finish the work at hand and walk to the Mirror of Erised with that doubt in his mind. He recalled the scene he saw in the cave last night. The holy light ignited the monster's suitcase, burning all the magic books and magic notes she carried with her, and then a group of skeletons emerged from the ashes. A head like black mist, and when this black mist rushed toward him, it hit the barrier formed by light and melted into something else. It was because I absorbed this kind of thing that the form of Magus Astartes changed into Primaris. I can understand this result, but what is that skull-shaped black mist? It melts and turns into what? As Bourne thought, the dark surface of the Mirror of Erised began to ripple like water waves, and then formed a constantly rotating vortex. A book appears in the mirror. The Secret of Cutting-Edge Black Magic. When he saw the title of the book, Bourne couldn't help but scratch his head, because just by looking at the title, he knew that the book must be kept in the restricted area. If you want to borrow books from the restricted section of the Hogwarts library through normal means, you will not be able to get a note approved by the professor alone. You must also obtain Mrs. Pants's consent when borrowing books. And just when he started to think about what he should do, the impurity mark that he had attached to the frame of the mirror, which he had never taken off, suddenly flickered, and the vortex on the mirror surface also rotated faster. Immediately afterwards, the book Advanced Black Magic Revealed was thrown out of the whirlpool of the mirror, and landed just in time in Bourne's outstretched palm. Praise the Emperor! And with this prayer in his heart, the pages of the book started to turn on their own, and he turned directly to the page where the Horcrux was recorded. Horcrux! Naturally, Bourne immediately thought of Voldemort and Professor Quirrell, but the explanations in this book allowed him to learn more about Horcruxes. Horcrux is an object created by dark wizards to store soul fragments in order to make themselves immortal. In order to create Horcruxes, wizards must murder innocent people of their own kind, and this is one of the most evil acts committed by mankind. The process of making a Horcrux requires a total of more than 100 different spells, and the making process needs to be carried out immediately after the murder. Therefore, even if an average dark wizard has this idea, he does not have such ability. Because Horcruxes are very precious to their makers, they must take some protective measures to protect their Horcruxes. From the most common spell-breaking spells and curses, to choosing special and difficult-to-break Horcrux materials, to prevent Horcruxes from being stolen or damaged, some dark wizards in history have made many different attempts. The reason why the method they tried is known to others is because in the history of wizards, once a wizard who dares to make a Horcrux is discovered, almost all knowledgeable people in the magic world, even the not-so-kind ones, will become their enemies. The most powerful wizards will quickly unite to find the Dark Wizard and the Horcruxes he created and completely destroy them together. The most common method of destroying Horcruxes is to use the Fire Curse. The unnamed author of Advanced Black Magic revealed also suspected that the Fire Curse, a spell classified in the field of black magic, was probably invented to destroy Horcruxes. As for why knowledgeable people in the magical world are so hostile to Horcruxes, the unnamed author put forward several speculations. The most reasonable one and the one he admires the most is, just like the Latin root of Horcrux hor, means time, hour, the process of making Horcrux is essentially the Dark Wizard intercepting a small section of the long river of time. And save it. In other words, Horcruxes made in this way are equivalent to an act of playing with time. Those who play with time will be punished. Those wise wizards are worried that the entire wizard community will be betrayed by the wizards who made Horcruxes, dragging them down, so they jointly encircled and suppressed them. This does make sense. However, Bourne was actually more interested in another guess he also listed, or in other words, Bourne's intuition told him that humble guess might be right. The earliest known wizard to create Horcruxes was the famous dark wizard Despicable Herbo from the ancient Greek era. The latter also invented many kinds of black magic and cultivated many kinds of black magic creatures. The Despicable Herbo was an ancient Greek. If he or a wizard who lived earlier than him invented the Horcrux, then it would obviously be unreasonable to explain the word Horcrux in Latin. Its name is more likely to come from an ancient Egyptian myth. There was a god in ancient Egypt who overthrew the rule of his uncle, unified Upper and Lower Egypt and somehow resurrected his father god. This way was taught to mankind. This is one of the speculations about the origin of Horcruxes. In the world of Harry Potter, wizards do not believe in gods. Wizards generally believe that gods are actually magic controllers who lived in ancient wizards or older races. Muggles don't know magic, so they worship them as gods when they see that they can do things they can't. The ancient Egyptian god taught humans how to resurrect from death. In the eyes of wizards, there is a high probability that he is hiding his own little one. After all, the magical knowledge that can resurrect the dead and make people immortal is undoubtedly very valuable, and no one will teach it to others for free. Therefore, no matter whether the Horcrux is someone's conspiracy or a conspiracy, a knowledgeable wizard does not want his idea to come true. I forgot to mention that the reason why Bourne is more inclined to the latter guess is actually somewhat subjective. Because that god's name is Horus. If we go by this guess, Bourne thought silently in his mind, those who make Horcruxes according to the evil methods taught by the god with the same name as the traitor are definitely some people who are traitors to the traitor, and they really deserve to die. Bourne may not have noticed that with the slight change in his mood, clusters of weak electric light flashed in his hair. The magic book that the monster, Madeline, obtained from unknown sources may be like the diary Voldemort made for himself, and it may also be a Horcrux left behind by a certain dark wizard in history. After burning it, the remnant soul naturally ran out, only to hit the loyal energy barrier and be annihilated. After the remnant soul melted, the dark wizard's soul was also broken into certain, basic particles of the soul, and then melted into my then Astartes Magus body through the energy barrier blessed by the Emperor. And because the wizard's soul and body are consistent, after the soul absorbs some nutrients, the body in the form of Astartes Magus also needs to be upgraded, and this is where the following principle emerges. Casting changes. After understanding the knowledge related to Horcruxes, the inference made this time can be logically consistent. Bourne feels that he is right. Not only that, he also had some other ideas. For example, since he has absorbed the soul power of an unknown remnant soul and his Astartes Magus has completed the Primaris Forge, if he can find more Horcruxes to purify them all, will it still be possible? Will there be other improvements? Of course, the main purpose is purification. Eradicate everything related to Horus, even if the state church priest or the inquisitor of the Inquisition, who is always known for being critical, too much trouble, appears here, he will have to praise Bourne with all his heart, honestly, one sentence, loyalty. Horcruxes such as the vampire Madeline's magic book are almost rare to find, because the mainstream attitude towards Horcruxes is total destruction throughout the entire history of wizards. But Bourne knew that there was a person who claimed that I have gone further than all my predecessors on the road to eternal life. That guy divided his soul into 7 soul fragments and made 6 Horcruxes for this purpose. Moreover, that person's remnant soul is now in Hogwarts Castle, possessing Quirrell, the annual disposable defense against the dark arts professor. Isn't this a coincidence, Mr. Voldemort? A sincere smile appeared on Bourne's face. For the first time, he felt that he and the Dark Lord were actually quite destined. The latter's coming to Hogwarts to cause trouble was not necessarily a bad thing. At least it made it easier for Bourne. And just when the little wizard was reading with excitement in the library, a certain professor who had been forced to sleep on his stomach with his face buried in the pillow recently opened his eyes. Chapter 70. Ah! Quirrell sneezed. However, he quickly covered his mouth, fearing that he would be punished if he woke up the sleeping owner behind his head. No, you must not go to Hogsmeade in the middle of the night again. He thought to himself. The humidity in that place is too heavy. I have to drink something to drain the moisture out of my body. However, before Quirrell could recall what magic potion could dehumidify him, a loud cry that sounded like he was getting out of bed suddenly exploded in his mind. Idiot! Don't think too much in the morning, your thoughts are disturbing me. Lord, Master! Quirrell was so frightened that he stuttered and apologized again and again. I'm sorry, I really didn't. Go get that leather whip. Voldemort ordered him. If it helps to remove moisture, why should I ask you to prepare it? Quirrell complied with Voldemort's instructions with a grimace, and took down the whip from the coat rack next to the bed. The swamp digger teeth and the feathers of the swamp bird on it were all glued on by Quirrell himself using magic spells. Don't forget to recite the spell I taught you. Voldemort reminded angrily. Several times, because he couldn't stand the pain caused by the whipping, Quirrell forgot to recite the incantation when he spanked himself. Don't think wrongly. This act of beating oneself with a whip is not Voldemort's perverted game of playing Quirrell, but a small form of ritual magic. Using a whip with swamp digger teeth and witch-bird feathers stuck on it, combined with a spell that Voldemort modified from the Transfiguration torture curse when he was young, and then using this whip for regular whipping, the whipped person can be fully strengthened. All physical qualities. Just as a Muggle blacksmith hammers steel, through this ritual magic a wizard can hammer his own body. This method was learned by Voldemort from a magic book called the Pink Book when he was in school. Don't ask whether Tom would have read this kind of book back then, it's just that opening the book is beneficial. The original copy of this book was hidden in a magic house in Japan, and Voldemort only read some fragments of the original leaked volume. It is said that Japanese wizards often use this method to train Quidditch players in order to improve their advantages in physical confrontation. Now, Voldemort didn't ask Quirrell to do this because he wanted to force someone to lock up a man. He is now possessed by Quirrell, and his remnant soul needs to draw nutrients from the host, so Quirrell must have a good body. In addition, Kylo also needs to supplement some nutritious meals every day. The reason why he slipped through the secret passage to Hogsmeade last night was because he wanted to find a smuggler named Mundungus to buy some magical animal blood. Of course, the money Quirrell spent was all his savings. Every time he buys the blood of magical animals, his heart bleeds. Snap, snap, snap. The sound of whipping, mixed with the sound of long and difficult to pronounce curses, R and L are not distinguished, sounded in Professor Quirrell's office and bedroom. However, what is a bit strange is that although Quirrell whipped his body very hard, the whip did not leave any scars on his body. Kneeling on the ground, he whipped himself for a full 20 minutes, and then Quirrell got up from the ground, leaning on the edge of the bed with some exhaustion. Throwing the whip on the bed, the defense against the dark arts professor mechanically opened his bedside table and took out a bottle of nutritious meal he bought last night with his eyes blank. Pulling out the cork, Quirrell raised his head and drank tons and tons of blood from a bottle of runes without even looking at it. But at the end of the drink, he suddenly felt something sticking into his throat. He stopped swallowing, took his mouth away from the mouth of the bottle, and then wiped his lips with the back of his hand. Okay? Feeling that he touched something like a gummy candy, Quirrell quickly grabbed the thing and pulled it out of his mouth. He took a closer look and realized that the foreign object he had just swallowed was a rat tail. What he had just poured into his mouth was rat tail juice. Quirrell felt that he was about to turn into a fountain, but at this moment, Voldemort, as a parasite, forced his host's mouth to shut tightly. Idiot! Just spit it out and waste it. What you just drank is indeed the blood of the rune snake. I can already feel it, it is having an effect. Voldemort said angrily, that guy Mundungus didn't sell you fake products, he just used the used Potter shampoo bottles to contain the blood of rune snakes, the formula of this brand of shampoo contains. There's a mouse tail. If you want to blame Harry Potter. From a certain point of view, Voldemort and Quirrell are really compatible with each other. Their character traits are that they will retaliate for their anger and will not miss any opportunity to give eye drops to the people they hate. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have become so weak, and I wouldn't have needed you to drink the blood of these magical animals to serve me. Also, Potter's magic shampoo was invented by Harry Potter's grandfather, who added mouse tail to the original formula. Henry. Poe enter. Quirrell closed his mouth and let out an angry groan, and slammed the empty bottle in his hand to the ground, breaking it into a pile of pieces. The rat's tail bounced up and down, and finally rolled under Quirrell's bed. Hey hey hey! Savoring Quirrell's anger, Voldemort laughed happily, feeling very satisfied with the results of his bewitchment. Very good, very energetic. Keep this rage going. Instead of reflecting on yourself, it's better to blame others. Remember the rabbit hole theory I told you? Be that smart fox, scare your prey, make them overwhelmed, make them run around, make them tired, let them put themselves to death. Delivered to your door. What are you waiting for? Why do you get up so late? You don't need to sleep for a long time in life, you will sleep forever after death. Get busy, Quirrell. What exactly Horace and Dumbledore talked about from morning to afternoon was unknown to Bourne. Anyway, he only knew that Weasley and Granger had left Hogwarts together before noon. Mainly, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley wanted to escort Mr. and Mrs. Granger. Because the latter are all muggles, and there may be any kind of passengers on the night bus, and they may encounter some unfriendly wizards. But Bourne's grandpa Horace doesn't have to be so troublesome if he wants to go home, whether it's through the fireplace or operating, as long as Dumbledore, the principal, opens some permissions, he can return in less than a second. Arrive at home. So Horace was in no hurry. Before leaving, he even called Bourne to visit the common room of Slytherin House. Originally, young wizards from different colleges could not just go to the lounges of other colleges. However, after all, Horace has been the dean of Slytherin House for half a century and has some privileges that even the current Snake King does not have. For example, when he easily opened the door to the underground lounge of Slytherin House after trying a password, the old dean directly called Fannet, the prefect of Slytherin. Chapter 71. Time passed by quietly, and it was only the second week of school, and Bourne's schedule evolved into what a volume king should look like. In addition to normal classes and exercises, he not only has to go to the library every day at noon and evening to work as an assistant custodian, but he also has to take time to see Peeves. And because Batter George was injured and unable to do strenuous activities within a month or two, he was temporarily caught to receive special training from Wood to prepare for the upcoming Quidditch League. Bourne wanted to refuse, but Professor McGonagall personally talked to him. The tone of the conversation was that participation in college activities is voluntary and there is no such thing as force. However, the focus of this conversation was Gryffindor does not raise idlers. What else could Bourne do? However, his grandfather, who had many ears and eyes, somehow happened to hear about it at the first time. Horace seemed very happy about this and wrote a special letter to Bourne telling him to give him a broomstick best suited for batsmen. In addition, Horace also sent a brown paper bag with the word top secret along with the letter. Inside the paper bag was a Quidditch winning guide that would only be passed down among successive Slytherin Quidditch captains. Bourne flipped through the booklet and found that the core idea could be summarized in a few sentences. Because Hufflepuff is very resilient, it is necessary to equip the chaser with a good broom and try to end the game as quickly as possible without delay. You can use any means necessary to play against Gryffindor. Players are not allowed to eat any food of unknown origin before the game, and they must not be left alone. And Ravenclaw, enjoy the game. Bourne thought about it and showed the guide to the Wood and Weasley twins. However, what was a bit surprising was that the three veteran players did not seem too excited. There is nothing to say about how to fight against Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw teams. It has been an old tradition for many years. After all, this is the winning guide for the Slytherin team, and naturally it does not specifically describe how to deal with the Slytherin team. Wood explained to him, because we have seen it too much in the past, and the professors deduct points very severely, so these off-the-table tricks are basically no longer used. At the same time, the Gryffindor Quidditch captain also reminded him, the focus of the fight against Slytherin now is mainly on the field. According to reliable information, Flint asked Professor Bubegi to buy several Muggle sports magazines from K Country a few days ago to study. Bourne, you and Fred, as hitters, must be more careful when playing. In addition to Bourne, there is another person in Hogwarts who has also entered a busy state. Perhaps because of the psychic attack from the rat tail juice, the two-faced professor has been holding back his anger recently. When giving a defense against the dark arts lesson to the little wizard, he found a red hat. The red hat is somewhat similar to the dwarf. He is short and strong, but his appearance is exactly like that of an old man. Regardless of his age or gender, he has a long white beard and a pair of vicious red eyes. They have sharp nails on their hands and like to attack Muggle humans. They wear a red hat dyed with the blood of their victims and wear a pair of iron boots on their feet. Usually, this kind of dark magic creature will choose to live in castles and dungeons, because those places are dark and people have probably shed blood there in the past. However, for wizards, red hats are actually a relatively easy dark magic creature to deal with. The Guide to Defense Against the Dark Arts records many ways to deal with them, from the simplest way of washing their hats with a clear water spring charm to make them feel uncomfortable and run away, to using the tarantella dance on them. The little evil curse makes them wearing iron boots so tired that they doubt their life. These methods are all feasible. However, Professor Quirrell, who had suppressed his anger, showed the young wizards another method that was not recorded in the textbooks. All petrified. Professor Quirrell cast a petrifying spell on a red hat, and then walked up to the little monster, which was almost as high as his waist. "I'm very angry, please bear with me." After saying that, he stretched out his hands and pulled down the iconic red hat on the little monster's head. The hat immediately covered Red Hat's head, and then he opened his arms from left to right, punching and kicking the little monster who couldn't see him. This week, except for the 5th and 7th years, all the little wizards at Hogwarts saw this brutal scene in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. As for the 2 grades that needed to take the Owls and Newt exams, the students experienced a nightmare exam. Many students' hands holding quills were trembling after class. Professor Quirrell is no longer a human being. This message soon spread like wildfire in Hogwarts Castle. Some young wizards have even begun to speculate whether the legendary Defense Against the Dark Arts curse has had an effect on this professor, and how long Professor Quirrell can last. Seeing that the wind was coming, the daring Weasley twins immediately hooked up with their good brother Lee Jordan and started a gambling game among the little wizards. In the past few years at school, the 3 of them have made a lot of money by teaching the Defense Against the Dark Arts course. At the end of the 2nd week of school, Horace also fulfilled the promise he made to Bourne last Sunday. Early on Friday morning, dozens of owls collectively rushed into the banquet hall of Hogwarts as if they were about to launch a low-altitude bombing. Together they were carrying 3 rattan boxes. 3 boxes? When he saw these 3 boxes for the first time, Bourne was stunned for a moment, and then shook his head to get rid of the unreliable guess that had just surfaced. He was thinking, could it be that Grandpa Horace divided the pet into 3 parts for the convenience of packaging and transportation? When the owl unloaded the goods and placed the rattan box on the long table belonging to Gryffindor, he was 100% sure that his guess just now was unreliable. However, the reality is stranger than speculation. Could Grandpa Horace be? Indeed, the requirements for an ideal pet proposed by Bourne and Horace are loyal, intelligent, and easy to maintain. But he never expected that the old wizard would simply give him 3 little ancestors. No, they are pets. Just after Bourne held a second of silence in anticipation of the destruction of his good life in the future, all his friends who saw the owl delivering the box had gathered around him. "Bourne, is this the pet your grandpa gave you? Come on, open the box and take a look," Ron said excitedly, even more anxious than the recipient of the gift, Bourne. Harry also bent down with curiosity on his face, wanting to see through the cracks in the rattan what kind of animal was in the box. This is definitely not an owl like Hedwig, otherwise it would be enough to just put it in a cage and send it over. No, the owl can be flown directly to Hogwarts. Neville also hugged Leaf, who was wrapped in a napkin, waiting for the moment the secret was revealed. He just asked Seamus for help, and the 2 worked together to give Leaf some cold medicine. The toad sneaked to the Black Lake last night, but when he came back in the morning, he caught a cold. Chapter 72. Little Con was furious. It broke away from Hermione's arms, did a 360-degree somersault in the air, and then sat firmly into a plate of pumpkin pie on the table. "Licking my lips, it smells so good." However, this is not important. After taking 2 pieces of pie and stuffing it into the pocket on his stomach, it crawled out of the plate without being hindered by the petty gain. It walked quickly to Bourne, pointed to the pet card that the little wizard had just placed on the table, clicked the 2 words Little Con with its little paws, then pointed at itself, and then got angry. He looked at Bourne with his hands on his hips. It seems to be saying, "Why am I so young? Why did you give me such a bad name?" Bourne spread his hands, pointed at the other two pets who also got out of the rattan box with curiosity, and then said in a flattering manner, "But you are indeed much smaller than them? But it doesn't matter, I will call you Con from now on. Okay, I'll add a chicken drumstick to you later as compensation. That's pretty much it." Hearing what Bourne said, Con retracted his bulging cheeks. It's just a mixed blood sniff. Even if he's smart, he can still easily handle it with just a chicken leg. No longer caring about this little guy, Bourne was ready to have a good exchange with the other two pets with more exciting names. For example, rub their heads or something. But as soon as he turned his head, he saw a scene that made him feel a bit toothache. In the world of Harry Potter, the saying names are magical may not be said casually. Ryan and Ruth looked at each other, as if they didn't like each other. One showed his claws, and the other showed his teeth. Fortunately, Bourne has a quick wit. He quickly picked up 2 sausages. The little flying stick is here. When your mouth is full of food, you won't grin. Looking at Ryan who was nibbling the food in small bites, and Ruth who was eating a whole sausage 3 times, and then taking a piece of haggis pudding by himself, his mouth was full of oil, Bourne knew immediately, who should the label easy to feed belong to. As more and more little wizards came to have breakfast, the news that Bourne had received 3 pets gradually spread. Not only the little lion from Gryffindor, but also several students from Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw came over. Some wanted to meet the eloquent Con, and some wanted to touch the tiger-headed Ryan. And others simply want to see Ruth's vengeful work. Although the students of Slytherin House would not take the initiative to go to the Gryffindor long table for the sake of face, Ruth, who felt that the Gryffindor long table could no longer satisfy him, soon began to sit in the banquet hall. Running around in all directions, spinning food everywhere. Draco tried the feel of Ruth's grey mane with a piece of fried pork chop he had snatched from Goyle's plate. He gave Bourne a thumbs up from afar. Meaning, "Your pets are really nice." Bourne couldn't help but cover his face with his hands. The swallow-tailed dog's behavior was hard not to make him, the owner, feel embarrassed. And just when he was so embarrassed that his toes almost dug out of the solace of his shoes, Ryan, who was still eating sausages elegantly and taking a sip of 91 pumpkin juice from time to time, suddenly sat upright on the long table. He turned and looked at the door of the banquet hall. Ouch! It doesn't even sound like a cat. Following Ryan's gaze, Bourne saw a figure in a linen robe flashing past the door, as if he had just entered Hogwarts Castle through the door. It's him. Bourne scratched the soft flesh on the back of Ryan's neck. It felt good, and he also discovered whose label Smart belonged to. Originally, he thought that this label should belong to the eloquent Con. But now, looking at the little Con who is constantly relying on others to talk and making many little witches, including Hermione, smile happily. So, where does loyalty lie? Bourne lightly shrugged his shoulders and said to the mixed blood sniff in his heart, "Con, you have to work hard." Lord, Master, what was going on with that cry just now? After I heard it, why did I feel like someone had broken something? Quirrell asked Voldemort in a low voice. Under the latter's training, he has learned how to speak quietly in his mind, just to prevent his thoughts from disturbing his master. However, no matter how cautious he was, he still received Voldemort's rebuke. Idiot! It's just a little wizard's little cat. You have to focus on your work. After Quirrell was scolded, let alone refute, he didn't even dare to breathe. Okay, Master. Early this morning, Quirrell went to Hagrid's hut under Voldemort's guidance, and stole a rooster under the disguise charm. He used a shrinking spell to turn it into the size of a small chicken, put it in his pocket, and took it back to Hogwarts Castle. You know, stealing is a crime. The reason why he was targeted by Ryan was because the cat was naturally sensitive to criminal behavior and criminals. However, it was Ryan who attracted Quirrell's attention that prevented him from noticing another pair of eyes staring at him. Mr. Peeves has been staring at Quirrell for several days. Since forming an alliance with Bourne, this poltergeist associated with Hogwarts Castle has transformed into a great detective and pursued the professor relentlessly. Not only was this cos behavior interesting to this old ghost, but also because after he was woken up by the little wizard Bourne, he immediately suspected that he was being tricked by someone else. Most of the magic that can confuse his thoughts cannot be performed by young wizards who are still in school. Only professors with powerful magic can have this ability. Before this year, he had never encountered a similar situation. The other professors were all old people, and only Quirrell, who had returned to Hogwarts to teach the defense against the dark arts class, was new. Naturally, Quirrell is the first suspect. How could Peeves, who was always known for being petty, suffer a loss in vain? It is said that people who are angry are like seeking personal revenge, let alone old ghosts like Peeves. Going back for revenge is a must. For this reason, he changed from his usual cheerful state, and recently he has been staring at Quirrell. Even the thing he loved most in the past, playing tricks on those little wizards, has been temporarily put aside by Peeves. Go. This guy must be weird. Because of his past experience, Peeves had remained invisible when following Quirrell these past few days. This guy has cast a powerful expulsion spell on the walls and doors of his office, so that spirits cannot pass through the walls. What serious professor would even guard against ghosts in Hogwarts? Also, this guy ran out early in the morning. When he came back from outside the castle, he still had something in his pocket. He looked suspicious when he walked, like a chicken thief. Chapter 73. Gryffindor Common Room. While eating hammer biscuits, Bourne's name for biscuits with ceramic powder added, the little wizard wrote today's diary. I don't know where Ryan went to play, but with his intelligence, he will definitely be able to come back on his own. Ruth had just stolen a piece of hammer biscuit and felt it was not as delicious as the rock biscuit, so he lay on the floor and continued to grind his teeth with the rock biscuit as a way to digest food after the meal. Con was lent to their dormitory by some little witches, and he probably won't be able to come back tonight. Bernd wrote down the date and weather, then began to recall what happened today. What should I write about? Because he promised to show the diary to Horace, he had to avoid writing about things that would worry his grandfather. At this moment, Harry, who was lying on the table and concentrating on copying Bourne's homework, suddenly threw the quill aside, covered his forehead and let out an ouch. Neville and Ron, who were sitting next to him, immediately supported him and asked with concern, "What's wrong with you, Harry?" "Thank you, I just have a headache." Harry thanked his two friends. Probably for Professor Snape's potions homework. Hearing this, the little witch Hermione across the table suddenly frowned and said in a tone of hatred, "What do you call homework? It's obviously an English translation of Bourne's homework, but I don't even know it." "Sorry to tell you." Ron couldn't stand listening anymore and stood up for his good brother and said, "What should we do? That old bat has gone crazy for some reason. The paper on the expansion potion actually requires us to fill a 2-foot-long parchment. Harry had to attend Wood's special training tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. If he didn't finish his homework as soon as possible, if he couldn't hand it in on time next week, Snape would have to deduct academy points like crazy. Then why has Bourne finished writing?" Hermione stretched out her neck like a cock-fighting cock and asked, "He also has to participate in Wood's special training on weekends. Bourne has a family heritage." Ron said matter-of-factly, "His surname is Slughorn. His grandfather is not only a potion master, but also a professor of potions class at Hogwarts. My parents are both. I took a class from that old gentleman. To be honest, the Weasley family is definitely a wizarding family that has a very favorable impression of Muggles. However, they are also wizards after all. Even though several generations of the Weasley family have expressed their opposition to bloodline determinism, their opposition is limited to their opposition to determinism, rather than their complete opposition to different bloodlines will bring different talents to wizards. So far, this theory of bloodline talent has actually been the mainstream understanding of the wizard community, especially the circle of wizards with high magic power. Just like only people from the Dumbledore family can attract the allegiance of the Fire Phoenix, just like a truly capable fortune teller, 100% of his, or her, ancestors have someone who has opened the third eye, just like Scar regardless of whether their grades are good or bad, the children of the Mander family have a very high probability of being expelled from school. There are too many examples that can be used as evidence for this theory. There is almost no possibility of falsification, and there is no need. You guys, stop arguing. Harry rubbed his head and stopped the bickering between the two friends. Bourne's homework is difficult to copy, okay? To be honest, I already regretted borrowing his homework to copy. Professor Snape specified that the homework should be 2 feet long, and he wrote 5 feet long. He reluctantly showed Hermione Bourne's potions homework. It turned out that the reason why Bourne's assignment was so long was because he attached many figures to the parchment. Mainly, the characteristics that need to be paid attention to when selecting raw materials for potions, as well as some of his personal thoughts on the configuration steps. Here are the correct techniques for writing long assignments. You're welcome. Bourne smiled and made a sign with Harry. Then, he took out a small glass bottle containing the liquefied patronus charm. Today Dumbledore gave it to Bourne and asked him to find an opportunity to give it to Harry. At that time, Dumbledore said this, "Bourne, you know what this is, right? When you give it to Harry, try not to look too deliberate." Bourne thought now would be a good time. "Also, take this too." With that, Bourne threw the liquefied patronus charm over, and Harry reached out and caught the glass bottle firmly. This potion can be taken internally or externally. When you have a headache, you can apply it on your head. It should provide relief. What is this? Harry asked a question that was very curious to all the young wizards present. This is the liquefied patronus charm. Bourne explained simply, this is a magic potion brewed by Grandpa Horace for me. It is difficult to buy on the market. You can simply understand it as a magic patronus charm. This potion basically has all the functions that a god-calling guard should have. Just because it is not released by myself, the effect is weaker than the magic spell. Except for the studious Hermione who memorized the words patronus charm and calling guardian that she had never heard of before, and was ready to look it up later, the other little wizards were more concerned about this seemingly expensive item. How magical is the effect of the shining silver potion? Pulling out the cork, Harry dipped his finger into some of the liquefied patronus charm, put it on his tongue and licked it. It actually tastes like sweet lemonade. He gave a little bit to the other little wizards. The amazing thing is that although everyone has different feelings after tasting it, the taste is always their favorite. Everyone agreed that Bourne's grandfather Horace was a well-deserved master in the potion world. Sure enough, making the potion depends on Mr. Slughorn. This is much better than the potion brewed by Snape. Ron's evaluation was the simplest and most direct. Bourne decided that he would definitely write this sentence into his diary soon. Then, Harry poured a little more liquefied patronus charm potion and applied it to the painful scar on his head. He was not disappointed. When the light silver potion penetrated into the skin of his forehead, Harry's headache disappeared quickly. This potion really works. Harry said excitedly, "Bourne, you are such a good person." On the stairs. Silence, speechlessness. The silence speaks. Voldemort was beyond angry. He first forcibly took over Quirrell's body and summoned the lost wand using the silent and wandless casting technique. Immediately afterwards, without saying a word, he used a magic spell to blow up the wolf fang flying saucer he threw to the ground into pieces. Appear quickly. Standing on the stairs, like a conductor standing in the center of the stage, he stretched out his arms and swayed magic spells around him. It must be admitted that the Dark Lord is indeed a master of spells, and the host's foundation is also good. Within 2 or 3 times, the spell followed Voldemort's intuition and hit Peeves, who was invisible and floating in the air. Sapras, Falco. Chapter 74. The Scarecrow Curse is a form of black magic. Originally, the wizard who invented this spell just wanted to trick Muggles and turn the Scarecrow into a living creature to scare the Muggle farmers. But later, some dark wizard discovered a phenomenon. As long as the Scarecrow awakened by the spell can absorb enough human blood, its behavior will become more and more like the owner of the blood. Moreover, there is a certain probability that a Scarecrow stained with blood will actively murder humans and drain the blood of its victims. Because they want to occupy the magpie's nest and replace the victim's human identity. At this time, if a dark wizard casts a transformation spell on the Scarecrow, they can really replace the victim perfectly in the short term. That's what Quirrell did. However, he used his own blood to awaken the Scarecrow's mind, and then cast a transformation spell on the latter. I walked around the work and carefully examined every detail on Professor Quirrell. Quirrell nodded with satisfaction, then raised the chestnut wand in his hand. A flame burst out from the tip of the wand, causing the Scarecrow stand into retreat. Control your eyes. Quirrell gave himself a hard blow. Remember, I am your master. Having been a slave for a long time, he actually now enjoys the feeling of being a master. It's just that he can't repeat what Voldemort did to him on Scarecrow, he doesn't have time now. Go to the corridor on the 2nd floor of the castle and hang around at the door of the abandoned girls' bathroom. You are not allowed to come back until I call you. After giving the instructions to the substitute and watching it leave the office, Quirrell immediately cast a disguise spell on himself. Immediately afterwards, after confirming that there was no ambush in the corridor on the 3rd floor where the office was located, he quickly slipped out of the door. Walking out of the castle and following a remote path, Quirrell quickly ran into the forbidden forest where the trees grew lush and green. And when he got far enough into the forbidden forest, he immediately took out the sweep 3 stars that he had treasured for many years. This was the game broomstick given to him by his family when he was selected for the Ravenclaw Quidditch team. Unfortunately, he later discovered that no matter how good the broomstick was, it could not save Ravenclaw's overly stable Quidditch ranking. Fortunately, I am a nostalgic person and have kept this broom. Sitting on the broom and taking off from Woohoo, Quirrell secretly rejoiced. Otherwise, going dozens of miles deep into the forbidden forest, it would be really difficult to go there on the same day. Come back. Sitting steadily on the broom, feeling the breeze blowing on his face, he not only felt much more relaxed, but even had an illusion. Sure enough, if you get rid of that bastard Peeves, won't luck come to you? Hey hey! Today is the day for Gryffindor Quidditch training, or in other words, Wood will conduct special training whenever he has time every day. Having just participated in an activity of the Transfiguration Club, Bourne was still walking in the corridor while reminiscing about the difference between transfiguration and alchemy and how to use them together. When he was there, the elusive twins came to find him. The two surrounded him from left to right, holding Bourne's arms, almost making him walk out of the castle with his feet off the ground. Wood went crazy and gave us both death orders. You must complete the entire training today, and you cannot be late or leave early. Quidditch season has begun, and we have to defend Gryffindor's honor. You take that triple speed bat and hit people, well, the task of hitting bludgers must be mainly up to you. The two brothers exchanged words with each other, from college honors to flattering, they chatted with Bourne all the way. There was only one theme of their speech: boy, don't think about running away today, don't think about learning to play ball. What can Bourne say? The team's captain Wood, despite the pressure of the Owl's exam, still insisted on taking the lead in organizing team training, so much so that his hairline issued an early warning when he was only in 5th grade. George had been undergoing acupuncture and detoxification treatment recently, but he still insisted on following. Come to the stadium, even if you can't play, you still have to sit on the bench and participate in training. Okay, I can play the whole game today and go to the library in the evening. But, I have a question. We are not in the castle, what should we do with Professor Quirrell? Fred patted his chest and assured, don't worry, we have made an agreement with Peeves, and he will also play the whole game. George nodded. Peeves also boasted that he could exert his own power without us following him, and he would try to reveal Professor Quirrell's true face today. Blowout. Bourne had a bad feeling. However, the two brothers had already carried him onto the Quidditch pitch, and they could hear Wood's loud voice from more than 100 yards away. Hurry up, time is tight today and the tasks are heavy. We have to practice the pincer formation. The three of them ran over quickly. George and Fred greeted the team members very familiarly, especially when they were with Angelina. Well, Bourne finally knows why George insists on participating in the training camp even though he is injured. He didn't even bother to talk about him. Angelina has a good sense for Bourne and takes good care of this little boy during training. This is mainly because the Con from Bourne stayed in their dormitory overnight. Con, who can imitate people's speech, is said to have learned a song from the girls who couldn't put it down. The sun is shining in the sky, and the flowers are smiling at me. The bird says, early, early, early. Quack quack. Peeves laughed wildly in his heart, as if he had transformed into the duck devil. Duck is homophonic to dark. For today's solo hunting trip, he put on a tweed hunting suit that he picked up many years ago, and also put on a deer hunting hat. At this time, standing next to him was a female ghost with straight and long hair and thick glasses. She is the ghost who lives in the abandoned women's bathroom on the 2nd floor, Moaning Myrtle. Good girl, do as I say. Peeves said with a smile, I promise, I will share the location of the secret bathrooms of the prefects of each college with you soon. After receiving the assurance, Moaning Myrtle showed a satisfied expression on her face. Recently, there have been uninvited guests in her home, the sneaky Professor Quirrell, who spends half the day muttering in front of the sink in the bathroom at noon every day. Weird and scary. And more importantly, Professor Quirrell was not handsome at all, which made it difficult for Myrtle to welcome him. How confident are you that if you scare him once, the professor won't dare to come again? Myrtle asked in a sharp voice. Humph. Peeves pouted, Uncle Peeves is here to take action. You don't have to be afraid. Just do it. After saying this, he swirled and disappeared into the deserted corridor like a deflated balloon. I believe you, ghost. Chapter 75. In the evening, at the gate of the castle, the players of the Gryffindor Quidditch team carried their brooms and returned to the castle to prepare for the dinner. Today is Halloween, and Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is in session again. But just as they walked through the door, an unexpected figure suddenly appeared in front of these little wizards. "Peeves, what do you want to do?" Worried about Peeves causing trouble, Wood took the lead and walked to the front of the team to protect all the team members. However, Peeves really wasn't looking for trouble this time, he just wanted to find a few people to chat with. If Peeves called the Bourne and Weasley twins aside and asked them a question in a low voice. If someone slaughtered a pig in Hogwarts Castle, the pig would be about 170 pounds, but because, well, his technique was not skillful enough. Not only did the blood spray all over the wall, but the pig was also sprayed all over the wall. The pig's pork was all scattered into dregs and could not be recovered at all. What should he do? Peeves glanced at the Weasley brothers and found that the twins swallowed their saliva, so he could only hope for Bourne. First of all, we need to determine whether that person has the authorization to kill the pig. Bourne emphasized the pronunciation of the word "that person." "Where can I get that thing?" Peeves anxiously took off his deerstalker hat, his hair standing on end. Secondly, did that person use a promethium burner or something similar to annihilate the genetic evidence afterwards? Peeves blinked. Although he was certainly not illiterate, he could only understand a few words of what Bourne said. Noticing Peeves' reaction, Bourne could only say the truth in the end, "Then there is no other way. I advise you to surrender." The draft blew into this ancient castle, bringing waves of chill, leaving only Peeves as a ghost in the wind. "Bourne, Peeves will not really trick Professor Quirrell." As he walked towards the banquet hall, George looked back at Peeves and asked Bourne in a low voice. "I'm just scaring him." Bourne took out his wand, pointed it at himself and the twins, and used the magic spell to clean away the sweat stains on the Quidditch robes. "Headmaster Dumbledore and Grandpa Horace, they all told me that Hogwarts will protect all students and teachers. This is an extremely powerful magical contract. As long as we are in this castle, we will be protected by this magic." He told the truth. In recent times, because of the great progress in transfiguration, he has been trying to combine transfiguration and alchemy to create a bolt gun with his own hands. But as a result, he made a model of the weapon but found that chemical energy weapons seemed to be subject to certain restrictions in Hogwarts Castle. Not only was the power of the bullet greatly weakened, but the firearm itself became very prone to malfunction. Puzzled, the studious Bourne consulted several professors and Grandpa Horace on this issue. The answers given by other professors are basically, just like Muggle electrical appliances cannot be used in the castle, this is a magical feature of Hogwarts. Only Horace and Dumbledore, because they had spent more time in Hogwarts Castle and knew more about it, gave a more detailed and reasonable explanation. What did they science to Bourne? "It's called ancient magic, and it also mentions a kind of ritual magic and ancient magic. Why must the little wizard go back to the old path of the Big Four when he enters school? Why must the little wizard attend the sorting ceremony when he enters school? Obviously, relying on the two magic props of the Pen of Acceptance and the Book of Admission is enough to determine the young wizard's admission qualifications. The answer is that these seemingly unnecessary processes are actually necessary steps to complete the ritual. Only after completing this ceremony will the little wizard sign a contract with the magic school, and you will be protected by the castle for the next 7 years. Under the influence of this contract, it is difficult for young wizards to be fatally injured at Hogwarts, and some minor injuries can even be cured overnight. Think about what happened to Harry in the vampire attack you experienced before. The guy named Kumbar, his last punch could have blown the little wizard's head off. But in the end, he missed the target, and his fist grazed the frame of Harry's glasses and hit the wall. This was the powerful protective magic at work. Although there was no brilliant light or spell, it was magical and had remarkable effects. This is Horace's reply to Bourne. However, there is one thing to say, Bourne's Grandpa Horace is indeed knowledgeable enough, but his specialty is potions after all. Horace had an understanding of ancient magic and ritual magic, but the depth of the discussion was not as deep as Dumbledore's. In his reply, Dumbledore not only conducted a science popularization for Bourne like Horace, but even reminded him how to get started with these two magics if he wanted to further study them. If you are interested, Bourne, you can learn about the Muggle Expelling Curse. There are many related books in the library. The so-called Muggle Expelling Curse is actually just one of the huge spell system of Expelling Curse. The Expelling Curse is the one with the most traces of ancient ritual magic among all current spell systems. Generally speaking, wizards mainly rely on their own will to cast spells. In fact, it is difficult for a wizard with insufficient willpower to successfully cast a spell. However, modern magic spells have become very efficient because they have been improved from generation to generation. Coupled with the invention of the magic wand, the difficulty of casting spells was further reduced. Modern spells have become very simple. However, in ancient times when magic spells had not been improved and the wand had not yet been invented, wizards who were not able to rely on their own will to cast spells had to find another way. So, they invented ritual magic. Through rituals, wizards can gather a collective wizarding will and use it to successfully cast spells. It is worth mentioning that in order to protect themselves, the wizards of that era created the most ritual magic, that was various expulsion spells. Some are used to drive away muggles, some are used to drive away wild beasts, some are used to drive away dangerous magical creatures, and some banishing spells can even drive away natural disasters such as floods. The reason why some muggle items in Hogwarts Castle will inexplicably fail is actually a manifestation of the banishing spell. Although it is also nested in protective magic, the two do not conflict, right? In the castle, the power of muggle firearms will be greatly weakened. This is related to the incident many years ago when Peeves used a flintlock to cause havoc in Hogwarts. It was because of that incident that the young wizards and professors understood the dangers of muggle weapons. They developed a collective will, which prompted the castle's protective magic to expand the scope of protection and exert a repelling effect on muggle firearms. Likewise, since that time, successive principals have insisted on offering the course Muggle Studies at Hogwarts. Chapter 76. Let's see what you do, you bad old man. Although his face was full of panic and horror, Quirrell was actually happy in his heart. One giant monster can be dealt with by one professor. Even if it is to be safer, it will not take at most 3 professors to take action. But he brought back a bunch of trolls. 1 for each professor. There is plenty left. Isn't there a certain old man who spends all his time walking birds? Chiloe Boulet and Cai, want to ask you to get busy today. And when everyone gets busy. Hey. Of course, when you want to think about it, when you want to do it, you have to perform it immersively. Quirrell suddenly stood up from the bench, with an expression on his face as if he was sacrificing his life for righteousness. Principal, please quickly ask the deans to evacuate the little wizards, I'll go. Quirrell had not only been preparing for this impassioned speech for a long time, he also stood up and straightened his chest and abdomen, in order to show his righteousness. However, only halfway through his words, he felt that the little wizards and professors around him looked at him strangely. Why is my belt buckle missing? Quirrell exclaimed. Then, the professor sat down again faster than when he stood up, covered his bare thighs with his robe, and lifted up his fallen trousers. His heart seemed to be bleeding. Not only because he had just died on the spot, but also because the belt buckle was his only valuable possession. The belt buckle was made of solid gold and was Quirrell's only personal property that had not been discovered and misappropriated by Voldemort so far. It was obviously fine when I returned to Hogwarts, but why did it disappear? What bastard stole my belt buckle? Bourne could answer the question in Quirrell's mind. At the Gryffindor table, Con, who usually looked carefree wherever he went, suddenly became wary. It put its head on its belly and formed a fluffy ball. Combined with Con's dark golden hair, under the candlelight in the banquet hall, it looked like a large metal projectile. With such an obvious target in front of them, some guys couldn't hold back their sinful little hands anymore and secretly reached out to Con. However, someone had faster hands than that guy. In the blink of an eye, Bourne arrests criminals who dare to commit the present. Whose sniff is this? Holding the nape of the mole-like neck with black fur and sniffing, Bourne gently shook his wrist. The eyes of this criminal who wanted to put Con in his pocket immediately turned into mosquito coils. After punishing it a little, Bourne immediately gave it an easy-to-understand admonishment, "That's my pet, and its name is Con. If you dare to bully it, I will throw it to Ryan." Ryan is a bit picky. "I will throw you to Ruth as a snack." When he heard his name, and more importantly, when he heard the word small snacks, a dog's head emerged from under the long table. Because he was impatient to wait for the table to start, Ruth had been hiding under the long table, grinding his teeth with a rock cake. Ruth's teeth were ground very white. When she saw the sniffer in Bourne's hand, the mixed-breed swallow-tailed dog immediately showed a kind smile. The focus is on its sharp fangs that reflect the candlelight, and its long scarlet tongue with horny barbs. The sniffer was so frightened that its fur stood up, and it immediately hugged Bourne's finger with its two little paws, fearing that the little wizard would throw him out. The small noises coming from the Gryffindor table could not be hidden from anyone who was interested. Dumbledore saw what Bourne was carrying at a glance. The old principal, who had just been a little anxious and angry because of the troll, suddenly saw that today's banquet could go on. Because, that man has now returned to his loyal Hogwarts. For him, it takes only a matter of minutes to deal with a few giant monsters. Don't panic, everyone. The troll incident is nothing to worry about. The Halloween dinner will continue. Dumbledore's tone became much more soothing. He used a loud voice to reassure everyone to sit down in their seats, and then continued. He gave Quirrell a special look. However, we now want to collectively welcome a guest to Hogwarts. As he spoke, Dumbledore stretched his hand in the direction of the banquet hall door, as if to invite someone to walk in through that door. Your former senior, recipient of the Order of Merlin Level 2, author of the best-selling books Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them and Monsters and Where to Find Them, developer of the Staff Code Manual for the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures of the British Ministry of Magic, and naturalist scientist and expert on magical zoology. Newt Artemis Fido's commander, has returned to Hogwarts. And just as he finished speaking this long list of titles, someone actually pushed open the door of the banquet hall again. Newt's commander, an old wizard with curly white hair and dressed more like a muggle than a wizard, walked into the banquet hall carrying a large suitcase. The little wizards immediately burst into applause, especially the little wizards from Hufflepuff House, who expressed their great welcome to the arrival of this legendary senior. There were also two loyal fans of Scamander at the teacher's seat. Professor Sprout, the dean of Hufflepuff House, looked at the senior and stood up to applaud, with little stars popping out of his eyes. He was so excited that he knocked the chairs behind him to the ground when he stood up, like a fan of his idol. Sorry, Professor Dumbledore. Newt habitually called Dumbledore Professor instead of Headmaster. Because when he was at school, Dumbledore was the Transfiguration teacher at Hogwarts. Thank you all, Newt bowed slightly to everyone, thanking them for their applause. In the end, Dumbledore reached out his hand and pressed down slightly, and this stopped the thunderous applause in the banquet hall. The reason why Mr. Scamander came to Hogwarts is because your Professor Kettleben was injured and needs a period of rest. But the course of care of magical creatures is very important, and I am worried about everyone's learning progress, so Scamander was hired as a substitute professor. In the next month or two, I hope you can learn some useful knowledge from Scamander, and also learn from him his attitude towards magical creatures. Of course, the most important thing is that I don't want anyone to forget to hand in an assignment for this class again. My homework was burned by a salamander. This reason cannot fool you, senior. I can tell you a secret. The salamanders taught by your Professor Scamander will never spit sparks at the little wizard's homework. The joke was met with laughter. However, Dumbledore was actually telling the truth. He also believed that Scamander's care of magical creatures' homework would definitely let these children who were spoiled by the talkative Kettleben know what it meant to be invulnerable. After handling the welcome and introduction, Dumbledore told Newt about the trolls, and he also asked Quirrell to tell where the trolls were caught. Chapter 77. Little Con ran very fast, and all four little paws turned into Hot Wheels. As it ran, it turned back, fearing that the big fools behind it wouldn't be able to catch up. Whack! Con roared wildly, 100% restoring Newt's voice, and woke up the entire Hogwarts. And just as it was sitting firmly on the handrail of the stairs, sliding down quickly, an accident suddenly happened. Among the giant monsters chasing it, one rarely used its brain and threw out the big stick in its hand. With the blessing of strange power, the big stick shot out like a cannonball and hit the handrail of the stairs at once. After all, the school's annual funds are limited, and good steel is used on the cutting edge. No principal has time to strengthen the stair handrails. Besides, even if a naughty little wizard blows it up with a magic spell, there is probably no way to blow up the stone handrails. No one would have thought that these handrails would suffer such a disaster today. They were hit by big sticks thrown by trolls, and the stone handrails were blown into pieces in an instant as if they had been hit by cannonballs. Con was also thrown away, and 7 or 8 pieces of gravel, which looked heavy to the eye, were about to hit its body. Con is in danger. At the critical moment, a rescuer finally arrived in time, jumped in the air and caught the Con, who spread his limbs. He lied to himself that he was a flying squirrel, and then fell back to the ground ahead of the rubble. The professors originally wanted to use a levitating spell on the gravel, but when they saw the change in Bourne, everyone except Principal Dumbledore was extremely surprised. Snape, how come his magus form is taller than the half-blood giant he transformed into when he was a child? McGonagall, no wonder Bourne has an outstanding talent for transformation. It turns out that like Tonks, he is also a rare natural magus. Flitwick, what did this kid eat to grow so tall? I'll have to ask his grandpa later to help my kids get up too. Sprout, this body is suitable for farming at first glance. It's a pity that he was not assigned to our Hufflepuff house. Hagrid, let's talk about why little Bourne, like me, has a unique appreciation of food. It turns out that he also has giant blood. Quirrell, what the hell is this? The broken staircase handrail hit his head. Bourne just shook his head, and then shook off the stone fragments stuck in his hair. Following Newt's example, he put the frightened con on his shoulders and returned to the door of the banquet hall in one stride. At this moment, the group of giant monsters also walked down the stairs with a bang and stood together in the hall on the first floor of the castle. They all roared. Waik! The target of their roar was Bourne, who did not enter the banquet hall but just threw con to his friends. Facing the challenge and arranging his pets, Bourne turned around and said lightly, noisy. However, his calmness only lasted less than a second. Slughorn, hurry up and sit down in the banquet hall. Professor McGonagall walked anxiously to Bourne and ordered with a serious face. We, the professors, are responsible for dealing with the trolls here and protecting Hogwarts. It's not the turn of a little wizard yet. Newt, the old wizard, also came over quickly. He was holding a small doll in his hand and didn't know what to do. That's right, kid. Hurry back to the banquet hall and just stay with your friends and watch the fun. Then he looked at the vice principal again, Professor McGonagall, leave the rest to me. Var. After saying that, the newly appointed acting professor threw the doll in his hand far away to the group of menacing trolls. He cast a shape-shifting spell on the doll. When it fell to the ground, the doll had transformed into a large, four-legged magical creature with a bulging back, several rows of sharp short horns on its head, and thorns like octopus tentacles around its mouth. The doll transforms into a horned beast. The horned beast is a magical animal that was once widely distributed in many parts of Europe. However, because of their aggressive nature, almost impossible to raise in captivity, and because their horns are extremely valuable potion materials, the number of horned beasts still living in the wild has become very rare. There is a special bond between trolls, especially mountain trolls, and horned beasts. Among the mountain trolls, there is an ancient test: a troll who wants to be the boss must not only defeat other trolls, but also subdue a horned camel beast as a mount. In the past, large amounts of scar tissue were found on the inner thighs of many adult male mountain trolls. These are the scars left by the horned camel's bulging back and horns on its head when they tried to subdue a horned camel, but 9 times out of 10 they would fail. Only the strongest mountain giants can tame adult horned camel beasts, and only such mountain giants will be recognized by other giants as the most orthodox boss. However, as the number of horned camel beasts became increasingly rare, the trial of mountain trolls gradually became impossible to continue. But this does not mean that they have forgotten the horned camel. In fact, after seeing the horned camel, the trolls will naturally have the urge to tame this magical animal. This is a traditional custom rooted in their bloodline. A giant monster with a decent build directly pulled his companions to the side, raised his thighs and was about to step on the back of the horned camel beast that Newt had made out of a doll. However, at this moment, a big stick suddenly hit the guy's head with a bang. One of the largest giant monsters walked out of the group of mountain monsters, and it was he who had just done evil to his companions. What kind of little shrimp is actually dreaming about riding a horned camel? The giant monster boss walked towards the horned camel excitedly. He wanted to prove to all the giant monsters that he was the truly qualified boss. At this moment, the horned camel suddenly moved and started running towards the castle gate. The troll boss immediately chased after him, and the other trolls followed closely behind. Just now I tried to use a challenge method to lure the giant monsters out of the castle, but unfortunately I failed. Now I can only use the horned camel trick to fool these giant monsters. Newt explained to the professors around him. Although this method does not have the same insurance as before, it cannot ensure that the giant monsters are reintroduced into the depths of the Forbidden Forest, but if nothing else happens, the transformation technique I applied should still be able to persist until they are introduced into the Forbidden Forest. However, he probably shouldn't say no surprises, because such words will always lead to some bad results. But before Professor's commander finished speaking, as expected, the accident happened. Realizing that his 2 legs could not outrun the horned camel's 4 legs, the giant monster let out a strange roar, and then threw the big stick in his hand. It originally wanted to hit the horned camel, but unfortunately it seemed that there was something wrong with its aim. The big stick whirled and hit a brass Merlin statue standing at the entrance of the hall. Merlin's beard was smashed off. Not only that, the statue was so smashed that it fell off the base, accidentally hitting the horned camel beast that was running wildly. Chapter 78. It's not just a broken wrist. While Bourne grabbed the troll's wrist, he also broke the bridge of its nose with his other fist. This is still exciting. After all, Bourne wanted it to be voluntary. And immediately, this giant monster leader not only had the first experience of being sour and sloppy, but also felt what it meant to be in the clouds for the first time. Give me up! Bourne burst out with a roar, and the muscles in his arms bulged so high that the clothes with the stretching spell were so tight that they were about to burst. The giant monster leader, who weighed more than a ton, was lifted up from where he was by his wrist, and then he was violently thrown to the ground, smashing a large area of frosted tiles. This is not finished. Bourne tightened his waist and abdomen, and once again relied on the strength of his legs and torso to make the troll leader, whose head was embedded in the floor tiles, complete a return trip. The other trolls were all stunned. At this moment, the expressions on the faces of the Hogwarts professors standing at the door of the banquet hall actually resembled a group of trolls. And Bourne, who caused all this, is like a child in some kind of addiction, happily letting the troll leader repeat here and over there for a while. If this move must have a name, then let's call it the Return of the Astartes. Boom, 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 boom. The giant monster quickly flew back and forth between the two places, constantly colliding with the ground, making the sound of a pile driver working. Does it have a smart head? The answer is unknown. However, although this guy's head is about the same size as a coconut, it is definitely stronger than a coconut. Even after undergoing the baptism of Return of the Astartes to heaven and earth, it still did not die. But it was really convinced. After all, if it is not convinced, it will die. The lesser of two evils. When Bourne once again made a hard landing between his face and the ground, the troll boss let out a whimper like whine, stretched out his unbroken arm and repeatedly hit the ground rapidly, making a series of pap 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 sounds. That's it, little wizard. Newt's commander didn't know Bourne's name yet, so he called him Little Wizard. Slap the ground and admit defeat. Trolls compete for the top spot. This is how the loser surrenders. With that said, he quickly walked up to Bourne and tugged on the little wizard's pants, because of his height. The magical animal expert said with emotion, "It seems that in the book Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, a new record has to be added to the chapter How to Subdue Trolls." Bourne slugged horn. At this time, Professor McGonagall also walked over menacingly. The lioness-like vice principal was very dissatisfied with Bourne's behavior of running over to fight with the troll without authorization. Regardless of whether Bourne is in danger or not, what's the deal with a little wizard engaging in hand-to-hand combat with a troll? If students from other houses see it, won't it reinforce the stereotype that Gryffindors are all barbarians? Where's your wand? Professor McGonagall slapped Bourne's thigh hard. She couldn't hurt the little wizard even if she rounded her arms. A wizard doesn't use magic spells to deal with dangerous magical animals. Who did you learn this from? Bourne thought for a while, looked at Professor's commander, who was taking the class, and then looked at Hagrid, with a big smile on his face, and said in a flattering way, "Sorry, Professor McGonagall, I was wrong. Forgot to take out my wand. Because of your recklessness, Gryffindor will be deducted 5 points, Professor McGonagall said seriously, still looking upset. However, she changed the subject immediately. Your pet just helped Professor's commander, and you defeated a 4x level troll. These 2 contributions will each add 10 points to Gryffindor, for a total of 20 points. One code after another, the vice principal added up the points for his own college, focusing on official affairs. So, those little lions who can't add points to Gryffindor are really... After just watching the excitement of the restricted level, and then hearing the good news about extra points from the academy, the little lions in the banquet hall were so happy. Many of them jumped on the stools, waved their arms, and cheered loudly in celebration. The young wizards in a dormitory in Bourne clapped so hard that their palms turned red. "Ron, I remember you told me before that a duel between first-year wizards will most likely end up with a punch for you and a kick for me." Harry clapped and touched him with his elbow. "Touch Ron next to you. So from now on, no one dares to challenge Bourne to a duel." Ron blinked at Harry excitedly, and then glanced at the Slytherin table. Different from the focus of the Harrow duo, the senior students, especially the members of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, captained by Wood, were surprised when they saw Bourne's Magus transformation and pain after the 2 feats of fighting giant monsters. The ecstasy in my heart was like a bastard checking out of a hotel room, I couldn't hold it in any longer. In this year's Quidditch League, Qin Shi Huang will definitely win. What Slytherin martial arts team? What Captain Flint is the same as Troll? Let's first get to know our batter, Iron Fist, who is bigger than the Crucible. Also, does that guy Flint want to try to see if he can withstand the attack like a real troll? Wood has even begun to wonder whether he should change his established strategy and develop new game tactics around Bourne, a batsman destined to become a legend. After all, it seems that there is a precedent for ending the game in the history of Quidditch by eliminating all the opponent's players. Wood thought this was exciting. The whims of the little wizards will not affect how the professors deal with the trolls. Because they saw how their boss was beaten into submission, the group of unruly trolls have now become extremely well behaved. If that stupid Barnabas had Bourne's skills, he probably wouldn't have had to bother in the first place. You can teach a troll to dance ballet. Without any effort, Scamander just asked Bourne to stand beside him, and then said a few words to the group of trolls. They obediently lifted up their 2 fallen companions, one was the boss and the other was knocked unconscious by the boss, and walked out of the gate of Hogwarts Castle. However, before they left, Bourne used his transformation technique to create a pair of scissors, allowing the trolls to voluntarily contribute a lot of beards. Your life is more important, why do you care about your beard? These smart guys still understand this very clearly. I want them to go to the Forbidden Forest for a while first, Newt explained to Dumbledore. No one except him understood the language of the trolls. I hope Hagrid, the caretaker of the forest farm, can accompany me to the Forbidden Forest. And properly place these giant monsters who were forcibly brought from the Forbidden Forest. When he said this, Newt glanced at Quirrell. Although there were many things that were unclear about what the trolls just said, Newt's IQ was much higher than that of the trolls, which allowed him to roughly understand what these big guys meant. Chapter 79. This is real. Ron stared and opened his mouth. Of course, what fun would it be for me to lie to you kids? He, Percy, was sitting on the sofa in the common room, tapping the spine of a celebrity biography titled From Tea-Boy to Minister of Magic with his fingernails, making a clicking sound. After the Halloween dinner, Bourne started asking around, how to place an order for a custom-made broomstick from the factory. Unexpectedly, after asking this question, he discovered a problem, even his grandpa Horace didn't know how to customize a broom. Horace's original plan was to go to the broomstick boutique and buy the most expensive broom for competitions for Bourne. This may be because he doesn't like riding brooms. The old man's understanding of this kind of alchemy prop is quite simple. The more expensive, the better. In the end, Professor McGonagall, who was very good at Quidditch and broomsticks, gave Bourne some advice. Go ask Percy, the Weasley family has access to this. So Bourne grabbed Harry and Ron and found Percy in the common room. And Percy didn't hide anything, and told them about the Weasley family's network in a concise and clear manner. This news will shock Ron for a whole year. There aren't many wizards in the UK, and it's normal for pure-blood families to be related to each other, Percy shrugged. In fact, only outsiders like the Malfoy family like to emphasize, well, what a long family history. With that, Percy winked at his youngest brother. Their family only has a history of 200 to 300 years, and it relied on marriage with the traditional British pure-blood wizard family to get on the list of the 20,8 holy pure-blood wizard families. Then since our family is related to the owner of the broomstick factory, will we be able to buy cheap broomsticks in the future? Maybe they will even give them away. Although Ron was usually very interested in speak ill of the Malfoys, at this time he wanted to know the answer to this question. As a result, Percy poured cold water on him directly. Unfortunately, this is impossible. The relationship between those people and us is not as close as you think. Relatives are relatives, and business is business. They can clearly distinguish between them. What's more, those people are only distant relatives of our Weasley family. Ron grinned depressedly. Then, Percy told these little wizards about distant relatives and how they are distant. Or, from a certain perspective, he taught these little brothers a lesson. The history of broomsticks used by European wizards can be traced back to 962 BC. At that time, broomsticks were generally made at home, so there were problems such as insufficient polishing and non-aerodynamics, which resulted in a very poor user experience at the time. Moreover, due to the limited magic level of the maker, the ordinary flying broom can only fly forward at one speed, it cannot perform complex activities such as rising, falling, pausing and so on. The key is, it can't fly far. The broomstick at that time was just a means of transportation for short distances. By the 12th century, wizards had learned to barter, and everyone began to trade brooms from professional craftsmen. At this time, broomsticks, because their riding comfort had been greatly improved, so wizards not only regarded them as a mode of transportation, but also began to enjoy the fun of flying on broomsticks, which resulted in many broomstick games. Quirk the Dike movement was also born at this time. From the 15th century to the early 20th century, many broomstick crafting families like the wand-making family Ollivanders gradually became very famous in the industry. This list is very long. Let's briefly summarize a few tasks to sort them out. Elio Smith invented the invisible cushion charm in 1820, which brought the comfort level of riding a broomstick to its peak. Elijah Grimm, the Oak Arrow 79 made by Elijah Grimm became the first broomstick to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Lattice Booth, the Moon Dream produced by Lattice Booth has set a flight altitude record that has not yet been broken by other brooms. Leonard Jukes, the Silver Arrow produced by Leonard Jukes became the first true Quidditch broom because of its excellent straight-line acceleration capabilities. However, starting from the late 18th century, because they recognized the destructive power of Obscurus and witnessed the rapid development of Muggle society, some far-sighted elite wizards began step-by-step and precise operations. The wizarding world began to gradually accept those young Muggle wizards who came from Muggle families and showed magical talents. Take the UK as an example. Around the 19th, the number of wizards registered by the British Ministry of Magic exceeded 40 for the first time. In 5000, this number reached 1991 to 2, most of which were contributed by wizards and their descendants from Muggle families. The expansion of the population base will inevitably bring about some changes in society, even in closed circles like the magical world, which appear to be very conservative even if they start to reform. For example, in order to improve supply efficiency, the Ollivander family's wands began to use only cores made of 3 magical animal materials. For another example, the production method of broomsticks, a popular home alchemy tool, has transformed from the craftsman model to the factory model. In 1926, 3 brothers, Bob, Bill and Barnaby Ollerton, founded the Sideways Broom Company and mass-produced their competition broom, the Side Sweep, which became an instant hit. Success. Within a year, every Quidditch team in the UK was riding the product. In 1929, 2 Falmouth Falcons athletes, Randolph Cage and Basil Horton, established another competition broom company, the Comet Trading Company, and launched the product Comet 140, which broke the Austrian broom market. The Le Town brothers had a monopoly on the competition broom market. Comet Broom, the break is easy to use. This advertisement was published by Comet Trading Company in the Daily Prophet for a whole month. From 1934 to 1937, the 2 broomstick companies Sideswipe and Comet continued to compete, and both sides continued to launch new products of their own. At the same time, other broomstick manufacturing factories also sprung up all over Europe. For example, the Black Forest Company launched a very elastic string-free arrow in 1940, but its speed still did not catch up with the Comet and Sweep series. In 1952, the Black Forest Company produced a new type of broom Swift. The speed has been greatly improved compared to the off-string arrow, but the lifting power is slightly insufficient, so it has not been favored by professional Quidditch teams. In 1955, the Cosmic Broom Company developed the Meteor Broom, which was the most affordable racing broom to date. It caused a short-lived craze at the time, but people soon discovered that the model's performance would improve rapidly after being used for a long time. Decline. Later, Cosmic Broom Co. Limited also declared bankruptcy in 1978. In 1967, the Nimbus Racing Broom Company came out with the Nimbus 1000, which once again set off a wave of excitement. Nimbus combines the safety of old-fashioned oak arrows with the maneuverability of the Best Sweep series, giving the broom a speed of 100 miles an hour and the ability to make 360-degree turns anywhere in the air. Chapter 80. After listening to the minimalist modern history of wizards, Bourne felt that he had benefited a lot, and said with emotion that among 3 people, there must be one teacher. The ancients did not deceive me. More importantly, Percy agreed to write to his father, Arthur Weasley, to inquire about a custom-made broomstick for Bourne. Thank you then, Prefect Percy. Having expressed his gratitude, Bourne declined Ron and Harry's invitation to play a game of wizard's chess and hurried out of the common room. I really don't know, is Bourne tired all day long? Looking at Bourne's figure, Ron couldn't help but sigh like a little adult. In addition to attending classes, doing homework, and participating in Quidditch training, Hermione said that Bourne will also work as an assistant in the library and read books on the side, and he seems to have to attend Professor McGonagall's advanced class on weekends. Harry stretched out a hand and flexed his fingers as he counted, one hand quickly clenching into a fist. At such a young age, he has to bear a burden that his age should not have. Ron shrugged his shoulders and sighed again. Let's play wizard chess, he said. Harry was about to say okay, but he immediately remembered something, so he quickly asked Ron, have you written the Defense Against the Dark Arts homework due tomorrow? I forgot to do my homework during Quidditch training. Ron looked at Harry and blinked his two innocent big eyes, as if to say, what stupid things are you talking about? I still want to copy it. Then why are you playing wizard chess? Let's go to the library quickly. Bourne is probably there, and we need to borrow his homework as soon as possible. Harry pulled up Ron, who was about to touch the stool, and the two of them picked up paper and pen and ran towards the entrance and exit of the common room. However, Harry guessed wrong this time. The reason why Bourne hurriedly left the Gryffindor common room was not because he had to fulfill his duties as assistant librarian, but because he had made an appointment with others in advance. On the 8th floor, there is a room where everyone can ask for help. Peeves' secret arsenal. You did a good job, Bourne said to Peeves seriously. Just don't do it next time. The Weasley twins standing aside nodded repeatedly. They both felt that Bourne was right. Peeves' blow up the school farce on Halloween sounds like a show that students would love to watch, but in fact it ended up causing misfortune to many students. Because half of the corridors were bombed, the entire second floor of Hogwarts Castle had to be renovated and decorated. This is not something that some professor can do and can be easily fixed with a repair-like-new method. Hogwarts, the magical castle, is woven with too many complicated spells that can affect the whole body. Naturally, it becomes super troublesome when it is renovated. Principal Dumbledore had to temporarily seal off the second floor and let several professors take turns to go there to cast repair spells in the past few days. The second floor was closed, and by the way, some moving stairs in the castle were also adjusted accordingly. Many young wizards who had just memorized the rules of stair movement by rote had to use their brains to memorize the rules again, and they would probably have to memorize them again in 2 days. Because the Gryffindor and Ravenclaw common rooms are on the top of the tower, they pass the stairs more frequently every day than the Hufflepuffs and Slytherins who live underground. Plus there are reasons that cannot be explained in detail. Therefore, the unlucky ones mentioned above are basically Gryffindor's little lions. It is a case of accidental damage by friendly forces. I know, Mr. Peeves has his own sense of what he says and does. Peeves agreed stinkingly. Quirrell was not killed in the bombing, and Dumbledore did not let Barrow have a heart-to-heart with him. It seemed that the matter of bombing the school was raised high and then gently let go. As a result, this poltergeist regained its former vitality and confidence. However, there is something I find very strange. Peeves took off his top hat with a floral patch on his head and scratched his scalp with only a few hairs. Lord Barrow was talking to me the other day and he said what kind of scarecrow stand-in Quirrell was using on Halloween. When making it, it is inevitable to use a spell called the Scarecrow Curse and a large amount of blood rich in magic. Basically, this is black magic. The use of dark magic in Hogwarts, especially the dark magic that may cause serious harm to young wizards and is very evil just by looking at the casting materials, is almost considered to have violated some of the castle's taboos. Even their past principals, who were from Slytherin Academy and were more tolerant of dark magic, would not allow this kind of behavior. Once discovered, a heavy blow will be taken. Lord Barrow could see it, and Dumbledore could definitely see what trick Quirrell was playing, but the greatest white wizard didn't react. Do you think it might be? Is Dumbledore confused? George and Fred were stunned by Peeves' last words and fell to the ground. What kind of intelligence is this? Anyone with any sense would not be able to say such mindless things. They both saw it. Headmaster Dumbledore must have begun to doubt Quirrell, and this appeasement move was obviously fishing. Bourne had not had any expectations for Peeves' intelligence long ago. This guy was not as smart as the con he raised, so he simply asked another question, why hasn't Mr. Sherlock come yet? Didn't he say that he also has some new ones? Did you find it? And just when he asked this question, the sound of horse hooves came from a magic landscape painting placed on a triangular easel next to them. "Sorry, I'm late." Riding on a warhorse borrowed from a portrait of a knight, Mr. Sherlock arrived belatedly. "I made an appointment with a painter today to maintain my portrait. I added a few boxes of authentic Cuban cigars that I like to the portrait. The gentleman has just started painting and is a bit unskilled, so the progress is slightly delayed." After a brief explanation, Mr. Sherlock turned to the topic. "I discovered that Professor Quirrell goes to Hogsmeade every once in a while." As he spoke, the great detective took out a piece of parchment with many square grids from his pocket, and each grid was marked with a date. "I kept a date record," he said. "Every time Professor Quirrell goes to Hogsmeade, the date happens to be the payday for the professors at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Once may be a coincidence, and twice can be explained by chance, but 3 or more times must be a pattern." Hogsmeade is a wizarding village adjacent to Hogwarts. It is not large and there are not many wizarding families living here. Young witches and wizards in 3rd grade and above can go to Hogsmeade for social practice on specific Saturdays if they obtain parental permission. To put it bluntly, just go out and have fun. Hogsmeade is not like a commercial street like Diagon Alley. There are not many places for consumption, and the consumption level there can only be said to be average.